common sense. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Here I am once again, sitting in the throne of Mr. O'Sullivan. He's going to be back next week, by the way. So it's just tonight and tomorrow that you've got me in this particular slot. And talking about sitting on the throne, I did a lot of that yesterday after apparently the coffee machine in this place tried to poison me. Either that or there's some sort of FSB agent operating within my production team, and, you know, some sort of a would-be Skripal killer is going to make me lose all my hair and look pretty unfortunate by the end of the week. But I'm just going to put it down to some sort of issue with the coffee machine failing to clean out its own pipes properly. Let's just put it that way, shall we? But no, here I am fighting fit. They didn't manage to get rid of me, whoever they might be, and however hard they try, they're not going to. I'm going to be here for a very long time to come. Do you hear that, stormtroopers? You ain't gonna stop me. Anyway, there's loads coming up on the show tonight. Like I said, do you know, I often think in this country, people just have minds like goldfish. In life in general, people have minds like goldfish, and they get spoon-fed so much ridiculous stuff in the framework of this pseudo-morality that they just swallow up. I went out for lunch today, and we were talking about what's going on in America. And talk about goldfish memories over there. It's mad. It wasn't that long ago that someone tried to kill Donald Trump, and he survived and shouted, "Fight, fight, fight." And all the commentariat went, well, that's it. It's like the second coming. It's divine intervention. He's won the next election. There is no doubt. And all of a sudden now, along come two people who once upon a time no one really liked Kamala Harris, did they? She hasn't really said anything yet, but it's all about hope and positivity and kindness, and it's wonderful, and isn't it great? And they were like, oh, Donald Trump, he's so wicked. Michelle Obama's like popping up all over the place again at the moment. He hates Americans. He hates goodness. You know, it's not about policies. It's not about what you can actually do. It's just this absolutely infantile, banal characterization of good and evil. And if you ask anyone who goes, oh my God, Trump is so horrible, he's so evil, and it's like, okay, so explain to me what happened when he was president last time. Point at the evil, would you? Give me an example of some sort of horrible fascistic Nazi behaviour. Okay, I'm waiting. You can't think of anything. Really? He's the most evil man in the world. He's already been president, and yet you can't give me one example of why he's evil. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? This stupid divide now between the left wing and the right wing. That one side is holier than thou, and the other side, basically the devil incarnate. And it's interesting, actually, because I was having another conversation, I have lots of conversations with me, another conversation with someone the other day, and they said, but when you have a left-wing government, a bit like when we had the Tony Blair government, because they project this image of we're the nice guys, we're the good guys, we're on the side of the people, right-wing is evil, they get away with doing a lot more right-wing stuff than a Conservative Prime Minister could even dream of. And so today, here we go. We've got a press release from the Home Secretary launching her new Border Security Command. They did, of course, promise to smash the gangs and all the rest of it. But if you dig down into said press release at some of the things they're planning to do, well, it's pretty tough, to be honest. They want to increase IRCs, which are immigration removal centres. And I don't know if you've seen these places. There's one set up at Anglesey. I think the other one's in Norfolk somewhere. I mean, they look pretty hardline, these buildings. They're like huge prisons, chicken wire fences, spotlights. They want to increase the capacity of those and fill them with a lot more people and then send those people straight back home on aeroplanes. Could you imagine any Conservative government saying that that was their policy without a load of short-fringed, pink-haired morons with placards taking to the streets and faux crying into their tofu takeaways? I mean, you know, maybe it should give us hope that perhaps, because it's a left-wing government and they can get away with doing right-wing things, that finally someone might actually do something about the horrific human traffic crossing the Channel. Well, let's get the opinion of Isabel Hardman, who is assistant editor at The Spectator. Isabel, it's fantastic to have you on the programme. I was a bit sceptical when I first sort of, heard this very simple, we're going to smash the gangs. I'm still sceptical about that. This idea that all of a sudden you can rejig, get 100 new people, rejig departments. They're finally going to talk to each other and all of a sudden UK law and enforcement has jurisdiction in foreign countries. But in terms of, talking tough on actually deporting people, on putting people in these huge detention centres, that to me seems like a pretty strident policy.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Trying to go back to the number of removals that were happening in a 6-month period back in 2017, 2018. So that was back when Theresa May was Prime Minister. And I think it's fascinating. It's nearly a decade since Labour ended up in a ridiculous row about its decision to print the words "controls on immigration" on a campaigning mug. And so many of its activists and MPs got incredibly upset about that. But the contrast between that and the actions that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has announced today and has been announcing over the past few weeks since coming into office, it is massive. And it just shows that Labour feels that it cannot be taken seriously by voters unless it's talking and acting tough on immigration. Now, the thing is that's what the Conservatives did as well. They talked and acted tough on immigration, but they didn't actually get the results that they said they were going to get. Now, you could argue that was because somebody called an election before flights were able to take off to Rwanda, but that was Rishi Sunak's choice. And it may well have been because he didn't actually believe in that policy as a deterrent at all, and neither did his Home Secretary at the time, James Cleverly. And really, we've seen, a failure of successive governments to match up the implementation of their policy with their incredibly tough rhetoric, and that may well be the trap that Labour ends up going into, which is that after a few years you can't blame the Conservatives for higher small boats arrivals, and that actually the problem still remains. I think one of the things that we're obviously seeing now is that Labour they're obviously not going to go for a Rwanda deterrent policy, but their version of stop the boats is smash the gangs, and they're much more focused on the criminal people smugglers overall than they are on the idea of a Rwanda deterrent policy.
On that, this is something I don't understand. I mean, smashing the gangs, it sounds great, doesn't it? It sounds as if they're all sitting in a house in Bradford, I don't know, having a cup of tea and discussing how to get people over the channel, but that's not really what's going on here. We've got a vast international criminal network, which is in some ways abetted and aided by hostile foreign governments. The Wagner mercenaries are eyeball deep in this stuff in Africa. In one hand, destabilising regimes and then profiting on trafficking people across that continent. You've got gangs in Tunisia, you've got gangs in Kurdistan in particular, you've got gangs in Turkey. So even what they're saying, what they want to do with working with Europol and European police, well, surely Europol and European police are doing this anyway. And, the fact that Yvette Cooper stuck that on a press release and said, I'm going to work with them, isn't really a change of policy at all. I don't see how that is any sort of, different approach from what should logically be happening anyway.
Yeah, and you can see why Labour would go for it as a slogan, as an approach, because it fits in with Keir Starmer's background. As he's always telling us, he ran the Crown Prosecution Service for he was Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years. He always likes to talk about the fact that he has prosecuted people smugglers. But as you say, in practice, it is hugely complex. And it's just one of many things that Yvette Cooper has to deal with as Home Secretary. She, I'd say probably is more interested personally in police reform, policing, violence against women and girls, and those matters, which, are a huge issue and are a real problem facing a lot of people in this country and could quite easily distract her attention. And this is one of the reasons why, a lot of people who've spent a lot of time in Whitehall think that the Home Office is too big and that it's just not possible to deliver on all of these different priorities. You can't really, try and stop the boats and tackle violence against women and girls and reform the police and all of these other issues. It's illegal immigration and legal migration, and all of these in themselves are massive and potentially career-ending for one Home Secretary.
It seems to me that when it comes to the huge issues facing the United Kingdom, which sort of completely eclipse and dwarf our Home Office, however sizable it may be, is the fact that they're dealing with massive international criminal problems, whether at one point it was the war on drugs. Well, good luck trying to, be heard in El Salvador and Mexico and, gangs from the Punjab. Now, of course, the biggest organised criminal enterprise in the whole world is people trafficking. It earns so much more money now than drug dealing. And again, it doesn't matter what some wonk on Whitehall says they want to do. You're looking at a complex network that involves almost every single country on earth. So it seems to me that surely the best way of going about things, because it's very difficult to stop things going on over there, what we should be doing, clues in the title, Home Office, is dealing with what happens here. And, so deportation should be a massive part of that. But the Conservatives tied themselves up in not trying to deport people and being overruled by Strasbourg. This has happened repeatedly, not just when it comes to small boats and flights to Rwanda taking off and so on and so forth, when it comes to actually trying to deport radical clerics and the like. So how on earth are the Labour Party going to somehow sashay their way through a load of unelected judges in Strasbourg who have their glass of port, while sitting in a bar at night, get a text message and just go, nope, that's it, we're going to put an injunction against that? Do you think they might actually have some sympathy with the Labour government, that they might actually prefer, say, a pro-EU, even though they're separate entities, a sort of pro-EU government in Britain, and might actually somehow, I don't know, invent some neo-legislation by which they'll have a bit more success managing to outdance some of the rulings coming out of Strasbourg?
I don't know about that. I think their argument in terms of tackling an international problem is that international cooperation is key to that, and that involves better working, better relationships with European partners in particular. Look, Labour's not going to start talking about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights and campaigning on, as you say, and the line that Rishi Sunak used a lot during the election campaign. They're not going to start saying, we don't want a foreign court to tell us what we can do and that sort of thing. That's just, that's not in Labour's DNA at all. And I think you're going to see the Conservative Party continuing to argue with itself over that. But I just don't think that's going to be an issue for Labour, and might be an issue for the Conservative Party at the next election, but that's just not where the debate's going to be.
But is it imaginable? Is it imaginable, perhaps, that a Labour government could end up somehow having a better relationship, let's say, with the judges in Strasbourg, where they don't seem to be as obstructive as perhaps they have been when it comes to the UK courts deciding on things?
I'm not sure that's how judges work, really. I just don't think that would have an impact on decisions of a court. I just don't think that's how the judiciary work.
Well, they shouldn't work like that, that's for sure. If they did work like that, we're all in trouble. But on that subject, if they find themselves in exactly the same sort of position as the Conservative Party, which, judging by what we've discussed so far, great, we can enhance these immigration return centres and stick more people in it. But if they all suddenly tool up with immigration lawyers and appeal to the courts in Strasbourg, then they're not going to be deported anytime soon. OK, great, we can sort of formulate new networks and structures of working with international counterparts. Like I said, I kind of would be bewildered if this doesn't take place already, that they're going to end up basically hitting every single obstacle the Conservative Party did. At that point, do you think there is any credit in suggesting that when it comes to doing difficult things, somehow a Labour government, much like Tony Blair's government, managed to find a way through in a way that a right-wing government finds difficult, because they sort of almost have a force field of moral rectitude surrounding them, and that actually if Sir Keir Starmer turned around and said, that's it, I'm going to deploy the Navy or deploy whoever it may be to obstruct boats in the Channel and send them back to France, that he might actually have some success in that department. Would he even dare go in that direction?
I don't think they're going to go for any of the kind of far-fetched things that were being suggested, during Boris Johnson's era as Prime Minister. But I do take your point that I think as a party, they are able to announce things that could quite easily have been a Conservative policy, but just in a sort of Labour font, and that people have a completely different response to it. And, we see that in polling, both negative and positive, that people, if they think a certain policy is attached to a certain party, they'll have a different reaction to it. And that's the case on other things like public service reform. Labour's much more trusted to reform public services than the Conservatives, but it often doesn't have the volition to do it. So I think that's the issue, is that, yes, they could announce something absolutely mad, like, I don't know, building an island in the middle of the Pacific where they remove asylum seekers and that people might give them a little bit more leeway than if the Conservatives had announced that, but they're not going to do that. So I guess that's that's my thing. And also, I think that the other point about this is that Labour doesn't have that much leeway with voters on immigration, and it never has done. And it's very aware of the sort of precarity of its position, that voters were angry with the Tories because they had not given them the sense of control after Brexit that Brexit had promised on immigration. And that's why they turned away from them. It wasn't because they were saying, oh, actually, we've suddenly realised that Yvette Cooper is the person to solve this. And that's why they're making these early announcements, because they're very aware of the fragility of their support from voters.
Well, I think they've probably upset quite a few voters already with some of their recent actions. Isabel, it's fantastic having you on and catching up with you. And let's get you back on again. Always a voice of, an erudite voice of much learning and understanding, a woman who has really studied her politics. And, before I go to break, once again, one of my interesting conversations I was having with a man who is making a lot of technology to track missing women and children from Ukraine. So when there was that huge flow of people seeking refuge from Ukraine, crossing the border into Poland and so on and so forth, there were a lot of really unpleasant gangs poised on the wings, waiting to kidnap them, coerce them, say, come over here, we're going to provide you with safety, we work for the Red Cross or whatever. And before they know it, they have essentially been removed and forced into things like slavery and sex trafficking. And he told me today, he said, we often talk about the number of men, the fact that people on these boats are vastly young men. And I said, well, is that not just for sort of economic reasons? The fact that, people club together and send a young man over because he's fit and healthy and they hope he can work and send money back. And he said, you would be amazed at the number of people who are lifted from these routes before they even get into boats. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, if women are trying, paying these people traffickers and smugglers, these international criminal cartels, to thinking they're going to have a good life over in Britain, well, how many of them do you think end up as maids and servants in other countries? How many of them do you think end up working in brothels, being forced into making all sorts of videos for adult content? And children as well. And the most harrowing thing, he said, is, and also children, when children, young teenage children especially, find themselves potentially embarking on these journeys and puts their lives in the hands of the most despicable, vile people traffickers and criminal cartels, some of them end up being used for organ harvesting. Let that sink in. And then ask me why it is far-fetched to not do something as dramatic as stopping boats in the channel, turning them around and saying, look, there is no passage here, making international headlines. So before these poor souls can put their lives in the hands of criminal gangs in the hope that they're going to have a better life and find out that they're in slavery, find out they might even be dead, that they actually say, well, actually, this doesn't work. These routes aren't available. And it might be they're stuck in their godforsaken countries, that their dreams of a better life abroad have been crushed. But ask yourself, which is better in those circumstances? Governments need to wake up and they need to act and they need to take dramatic action because people's lives depend on it. Right, going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere because there is so much more we are going to talk about. And we're going to revisit a popular topic at the moment, or an unpopular topic, if you will, which is the prosecutions being handed down to various people who engaged in rioting. And perhaps were they a little bit too heavy-handed? And how many people out there simultaneously are having suspended sentences for crimes that some might consider even more serious? Back after this.
Well, two things. First of all, I think there is clearly a problem.
Yeah.
This government, what's its main message? It came to power, Rachel Reeves stood up in the House of Parliament and said there is no money left.
Right.
And what they've been doing, they've been spraying money to all their trade union friends all over the summer.
Yeah.
There is clearly a problem in the Downing Street operation, because if you're that dysfunctional, you can't get that basic message over, that you are doing things in complete contradiction to what you said was the main mission of your government just a month. You know, it's madness. The other thing is, I don't know whether you'll agree with me on that man needs a holiday.
Yeah.
You know, he's tetchy, he's exhausted. I know he's only been Prime Minister for a little while, but of course he was campaigning for a long time before that.
Yes.
I don't like this sort of general macho thing that we like our politicians, you know, in the office all the time. I think sometimes they need a break.
Well, I think
that man does look exhausted.
The country would benefit in a huge way if he just took a break for the next 4 years and you know, didn't bother us at all with anything.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
You know, one thing I find really fascinating about doing this job, sometimes I don't know what topics I'm going to suddenly pounce upon when I'm thinking out loud and engaging you in a one-sided conversation. And just before the break, I was talking about what goes on, what really goes on with people trafficking. I met up with a really good friend of mine today who has been working tirelessly. He's former SAS and was working in cyber comms and psyops for 5 and 6. A really impressive man. And most recently, he's been using technology that his firm has designed and is rolling out to track some of the people trafficking that has taken place from Ukraine. And he told me that, you know, this isn't just, oh, by the way, everyone leaves and they becomes a refugee. Everyone, you know, there's a migratory flow and they end up in a boat. No. People are picked off all the time for other nefarious purposes. If you're a woman, you might be sold in a slave market to go and work as someone's in-house cleaner, cook, maid, probably not for any sort of salary, no life. If you're a woman of a certain age, if you're a woman of a other age, then, well, you could find yourself being sold on the dark web or on the internet for other services, adult services. You could probably find yourself being trafficked across Europe to end up in a brothel. Or perhaps some of the videos that people are watching on user-generated porn sites are not people who are enjoying what they're doing, have not consented to some of the things happening to them. Perhaps they were people fleeing war. I think you should all think about that. But most harrowingly, so many young children and teenagers who are escaping war or who end up mixed up with these international criminal cartels and trafficking gangs are sold on the dark web for organ harvesting. Now, I said this before the break, and my producer, whose other half happens to be Russian, came through and said, I'm so glad you brought that up, because her other half has an adopted brother from Ukraine. And this boy was rescued when he was found on the dark web being advertised by the Wagner Group to be sold for his organs for £4,000. That is why, when it comes to stopping these massive migratory flows and smashing the gangs, yes, we've got to smash the gangs, but these are huge, complex, international, sinister operations backed by hostile states, terrorist organisations. It's very hard to smash those gangs when so much money is involved, when so few ethics even come into it. But it's also why we do have to take radical action to stop the boats, because people don't realise when they think they're paying money for a better life, when they get caught up in these networks, thinking they're going somewhere for safety, for prosperity, they don't know who they are messing with. And unless they stop having that dream, that they can come here and really have a deterrent, that they should not be doing these things, then they are at serious risk. I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, who's a barrister and broadcaster. And interestingly, when you came in, you said, yeah, you know about this as well.
I do, and I was praising you for talking about it, because nobody in the media is really talking about this. It is absolutely abhorrent, and it's a different side of the industry. I was talking about a movie I'd recommend to everybody called Io Capitano, which basically shows the desperation of the people who are basically being people trafficked. And they are lied to in the villages. They're shown, promised a better life. What happens, they go on this journey, they're paying huge amounts of money they save up for. Different parts of the journey, they then get told to blackmail the rest of their family, otherwise they're not going to go any further. So they get more and more that sort of stuff. You get people who are tortured if they don't write the relevant messages home and so on and so forth. And those who don't raise enough money, you're right, they get sent off to people trafficked for abhorrent trades, or indeed for their organ harvesting. It's called Io Capitano. It's a 2023 movie. I saw it, there's a really, really different views on it. But the gangs are what's abhorrent. Yeah. And I've always said, people say, oh, it's blaming people coming over here. Well, I get that. We need to do two things. Is one, we need to absolutely get rid of the gangs. You need to target those to the extent that you can. But also to tell people, look, it's not an easy life over here. Yeah. This is, don't come in the first place. Don't make it look as though it's attractive. So people then work on that basis. So it's about hearts and minds, about the messages, but call out this abhorrent trade, and all praise to you and to Samara for talking about it. Yeah,
I mean, we need to be really making sure that people who think they can get over to Britain absolutely cannot. And for me, you know, if we turned around one boat, it would make international headlines that would go around the world. That would, to me, would be a bigger deterrent than any flight to Rwanda.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But Rwanda was just a crazy word in the end, wasn't it?
Just do it.
And they had that crazy thing of trying to do the legislation about it, saying, well, it wasn't safe, and so we'll pass a law saying that it's safe. And it was Abraham Lincoln who said, if you call the tail of a leg, or they call the tail of a dog a leg, how many legs does a dog have? Well, the answer is still 4, because just because you call a tail a leg doesn't make it so. So calling Rwanda a safe country when it may not be didn't help. But it was the wrong message. And it wasn't about that. It was supposed to be a deterrent. And you look at the crazy numbers of people coming over when the weather's fine again. That's what's happening. We need to tell people it's not safe to come, and we need to also shine a spotlight on the abhorrent trade.
And when it comes to some of the policy making happening at EU level, because, you know, before they land on our shores, before they get halfway across the channel, this is an EU problem because they have open borders and they're all members of the same jurisdiction when it comes to managing to tackle these things. You know, they have Frontex. Interesting, the former head of Frontex, the EU border force, is actually now a spokesperson for Rassemblement National. Says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I don't understand why they don't go after, because one thing I know, because I do a lot of research into my topics, is a lot of the people traffickers use TikTok to advertise their wares, if you will, to sort of communicate, things like Snapchat, but especially TikTok. And there are videos on TikTok sort of showing people, you know, come to this country, is going to be great. And I mean, why on earth is there not being moves to shut that down? Well, instead, in this country, rather than going, oh, well, we've got, you know, basically Chinese spyware being used everywhere in the United Kingdom, being deployed to get people trafficked across to this country, being used to sell drugs, being used to sell zombie knives, you know, being used to brainwash kids into questioning their gender and having mental health issues. Well, perhaps let's close that down. Instead, they're going after X, they're going after Twitter, which is just people talk. They might say some ugly things, but it's people talking.
No, it's a platform, and that's the different thing, isn't it? So you're absolutely right. You've got to look at these messages, because if you can stop the messages, and we're talking about a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of that in the story at the moment. We're living in a diseased information age. And as a result of that, we're being polluted. Our messages, our hearts and minds are being polluted, and so on and so forth. Dick Whittington came to London because he thought the streets were paved with gold. You know, it's that sort of thing. The message we have to give them is, you're not going to get in the first place, so don't bother trying. Don't save up in the villages. We absolutely understand you're in a terrible position. We have legal ways of getting into the country, which you make sure that those should be efficient and so on and so forth. But if you come illegally, the answer is no. You're never going to work on that basis. The crazy thing that Starmer's doing, he's treating those who came illegally in the same ways he treats those who came legally. So they still get processed and so on and so forth. And that is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, because it's not a deterrent. We need to look at this, and we need to be really clear, as you say, use the power of communication communication to communicate that message.
Use the power of being an island as well, because if any country, the Channel is the shortest, the most narrow stretch of water, frankly, that this is taking place on. And if any country can lead by example to other countries and send the message that boats won't get across bodies of water to the other side, that is where you do it, because you can do it safely.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a calm sea. It's a very narrow stretch. On a good day, you can see the other country. You can easily, with technology, I am sure, because it's the busiest shipping channel in the world, detect where these boats are, because we do. We detect where they are, we pick them up and bring them ashore. We just need to pick them up and take them in the opposite direction about, you know, 5 times, and then the message is done.
I know, you're absolutely... And actually, the journey starts a lot earlier than that. So you look at these sort of things. Where are people coming from originally? Get that message back there. And as always, as you speak such sense, the world will be a better place if they listen to you. So the reality is this. Work out that journey. Technology is there to help. We can pinpoint people. So if you can pinpoint people, stop at the earliest part of the journey.
But this idea of, oh, let's smash the gangs. What, you're going to go smash the Wagner mercenaries and the Taliban? I mean, get real.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you need to look at that sort of side and make that make sense. So well done you. Well done, Samara, for calling that. We continue to call it out. But I do think in the media we have a responsibility.
We need to talk about
and
these
you
issues.
absolutely need to talk about these sort of things to make that make sense.
Right, we're going to take a short break now. But do you know what? I'm going to... My very good friend I've just been speaking about there, who does all of this work, trying to prevent women and children from Ukraine being sold into sex slavery and organ harvesting. I'm going to see if he'll come on the show. I was twisting his arm over lunch and he's got pretty close to saying yes, because I think if he was sitting here and sat down and told you about the work that he does and what's really going on, you would be astonished and pretty disgusted and harrowed. Well, on that note, go put the kettle on, because I'm back just after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. Now, do you know, sometimes when we read a headline, we think, blimey, that seems a bit much, doesn't it? I can't believe what I'm reading there. This is awful. Well, you know, that is how headlines work, I am afraid. They're very often clickbait. If it's in The Guardian, it's probably that some form of vegetable is now deemed some colonial stain on our history and should be banned from supermarket shelves. If it's the Daily Mail, however, it's probably going to get you all in a tiz about something that might not be quite what it seems by the package. And this next story, I think, is slightly one of those. So you've probably heard, you've probably read that a man has been given 20 months in prison for yelling at a police dog, and thought to yourself, if you've got a pet dog, I yell at my dog a fair amount of time and I hope I don't get 20 months in prison. That seems a bit rich. Oh, two-tier Kia is absolutely out of control on this one. But like I said, some things aren't always what they seem. Ain't that right, Mr.
It is
Eborn?
certainly right. P.T. Barnum, the great showman, always used to say, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. And the way you start a fight is with clickbait. And clickbait, rioter who shouted at a police dog's face, jailed for 20 months. You might as well have said, rioter who wore trainers was jailed for 20 months, because that's not the full story. The full story, much deeper into it, there's video evidence showed this particular person, McCarthy, who was threatening people. There were actual people involved in this. He was also confronting with the police and so on and so forth. So it wasn't just the dog. There was all sorts of other things and so on and so forth. What they have to do is avoid this. In the media, what I like about it, it's got to be more light and less heat. What you're so brilliant at doing is making sure we call this out. Because when we spoke about this in the break, you say, hang about, this is misleading, I won't do the story.
Oh, yeah,
and we said...
It's actually on the floor.
It is true, he's going to rip it out. I won't do that story.
Don't want it anymore.
And I suggested that we should do it because it's a good opportunity to make people question everything.
Yeah.
Don't just go for the clickbait. We live in this diseased information age. We talk about this misinformation, the damage that can cause later. This is a good example of that. It's not just the police dog's face.
And I would say that is not to say, by the way, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, blimey, Alex has had some sort of lobotomy, she no longer thinks it's two-tier Kia and all the rest of it, then no, I actually do think that there is a huge discrepancy between the way that we've had... Look, I'm kind of a fan. If you've been chucking bricks and setting fire to hotels, you get prosecuted and sentenced very quickly. Yeah. Fine. But there are a lot of people who are getting suspended sentences for, I don't know, raping someone. And that doesn't, to me, seem fine. And at the same time, a lot of people out there, and look, I don't know about, you know, any sort of statistics or numbers, but the way that everyone feels right now, the optics really matter because of this stuff, because of misinformation. And what people saw if they looked at social media during these riots is they saw one lot of people, largely Caucasian in colour, behaving absolutely abhorrently and disgracefully and criminally. They saw another lot of people, largely not Caucasian in colour, saying that they were out to defend themselves, carrying weapons. Now, what they've seen in a lot of the show trials is the one half being dragged, hauled into the courts, and the other half not. Now, I don't know. I haven't sat there and looked at the sort of minutes of every court in the country. What I have done is sort of when they've popped up on the telly box, you know, sort of had a casual gaze and thought, well, the optics, whether or not it's true or not, the optics don't look good.
No, you're absolutely right. And I always say justice, not just to be done, but to be seen to be done.
Exactly.
And it's clearly not being seen to be done.
Right.
And justice is supposed to be blind. So it doesn't matter what colour, creed, whatever it is, the law should be applied universally to everybody. And I always say that trust comes in on foot, but leaves on horseback. And the trust in the police, in certain parts of the media and so on and so forth, is at an all-time low because of instances like this. And it could also be sometimes about the reporting, as we've given an example of that today.
Just now,
So you have a look at that sort of side. You're right, we don't know what the stats are. We should look at that.
We should.
But whoever's working on that basis, justice needs to be seen to be done. And you say, look, we're right to ask those questions, and we will continue holding people's feet to the fire on that basis.
But I think, of course, you know, Sir Keir Starmer's framing of this sort of pays into these concerns that people had, because he immediately came out and said, this lot are all far-right and racist, and I'm going to protect the Muslim community, whereas people are thinking, well, hold on, you know, we saw videos of people from that community who may well have meant us harm, so I don't think he's helped himself. Now, another thing that people are still questioning is Hare Hills, which to me was the start of all of this. The Hare Hills riots were the first ones that took place. That was the first time people started lobbing fridges at police cars, setting buses on fire and behaving like feral beasts. And we didn't have the 24-hour courts. We haven't seen whether they'd taken place or not, I don't know, but we hadn't had televised prosecutions of that. What we saw were the police very much backing away. Sue Reid, who I think is an absolutely fantastic journalist, a proper one, you know, she's sort of there with a notepad and going to get into the heart of stories. Has actually gone to Nottingham to meet people from the Roma community. As we know, it's the Roma community who are very much behind those riots in Hare Hills. And it's an astonishing story about, well, some of the things that have happened. And, of course, in that, what we know is there are children being taken into child protection, and this is what caused the protests on the streets. Well, in her report, she talks about a number of people here who have lived among a particular Roma Slovak community who were coming into shops offering to sell babies for £250. Yeah. So, you know, perhaps children did need to be taken into care. Well, I don't know about the family in these riots, but when you have here, and she's done the research, official minutes of a Neighbourhood Watch report claimed a Roma youth had offered to sell a 3-week-old baby wrapped in a blanket to a man called Colin Barton and his Sri Lankan wife Nicola, who owned a halal fish and chip shop in Page Hall, and the price was £250. And it goes on this fascinating story that, things like this have been going on. And she interviews Roma as well, who say, well, look, you know, we come over here, we're welcomed in this country, and most other countries boot us out, and you give us fantastic benefits. And one guy was even showing photographs of the palace he's building back at home in Romania. Right. You couldn't make it up, but these stories are important.
Oh, and this is why you do need these brilliant journalists. Yeah. And I think praise where praise is due, and everybody has a pop at the media, but when you get great journalists such as yourself and our wonderful friend here, what we do, we dig down and we keep shining that spotlight and not just ask the questions, but question the answers. And so you're right, we need to look at the specifics, we need to work out, call out the abhorrent things that go on in this world. Right. And we're living in a very ugly world at the moment. There are some horrible, horrible things, and people don't always talk about it. The news cycle is bizarre because we tend to focus on one story and then all the other stories get lost and we forget about that sort of stuff. We need to keep revisiting these sort of things. Where it's a legitimate case to take somebody into care for their own protection, you've got to do it. Going back to your point about the optics, though, if you're doing it in public eyes and the whole crowd's out there and you're dragging people out, it's going to cause trouble. And you need to take the sting out of that sort of side. You need to explain to people, communicate, why are we doing this? And this is why we're doing it in these circumstances where we don't inflame the situation. We basically try and calm it down. This is for protection and these are the reasons why.
I couldn't agree more. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere because, blimey, we're covering some stuff today, aren't we? And there's a good 2.25 hours of that left to come. I'll see you after this. Hello there, welcome back. Well, Robert Jenrick, he's sort of becoming the favourite, I think, in the race to be the next Conservative leader from my sort of distance position of watching these things as a casual spectator. Now, he's turned around and said that he would like to include Boris Johnson in his cabinet if he became Conservative Party leader and returned the party to power. But I'm wondering if Boris Johnson would actually want to come back and get an MP salary when he's clearly earning a lot of money doing speaking tours and having a nice old time. And also, is Boris Johnson this sort of magical silver bullet that he once was? Well, let's get the thoughts on that from Ryan Saby, who's Deputy Political Editor at The Sun. Hi, Ryan.
Evening, Alex.
Great to have you on. So, Boris, I mean, it's funny. Everyone always goes for, what about Boris? Boris is going to save the day. Boris is going to sort of be brought back and the Conservative Party will get a majority and it'll be woo, it'll be spiffing brilliant. And, you know, I just think that day's past.
Yeah, and I think Boris has probably, he feels like for the moment he wants to certainly sit this leadership election campaign out and the next sort of, you know, few years of the Conservative Party history out. And also, I think if he is going to come back, I think there probably needs to be a lot more distance between him and Partygate. I think that is still fresh in the memories of many people. So I think if Boris is to come back in any sort of guise, I think he probably waits 2 or 3 years. Then he sees, is there a by-election on the horizon? Do I then come back? What's the state of the Conservative Party in 2 or 3 years' time? And I think there's so many questions about the Conservative Party and the next leader. Is the next leader who's going to be elected come what at the end of October? or November. Is that person actually going to be the leader to fight the next election, or is this leader really just going to be some kind of interim leader who's going to sort of settle the nerves in the Conservative Party and just sort of set them up as a party who looks like they could get in government again? But I think Boris, it's time for him. I feel like he's going to sit this one out. He's earning a lot of money on the lecture circuit. He's got his book coming out in October, and you just kind of feel this is not the right time for him to come back.
How would you say the runners and riders are looking at the moment, Ryan? Because, I mean, I sort of feel like Robert Jenrick is making a really good progress, and people are sort of suggesting it could end up as a two-horse race between the two wings of the party, Jenrick versus Tugendhat. But is that just sort of, mischief-making by columnists, or is that what's really going on?
I feel like Robert Jenrick's making an extremely good stab at this. I think he's got a very good campaign team behind him. I also think he's made the best of the summer, actually. Him and also you mentioned there Tom Tugendhat. They really have been up and down the country. I think Robert Jenrick this week alone is visiting 15 local associations. So I think Robert Jenrick has not only got his eye on the MPs who are going to whittle this down to the final two come after that party conference, but he's also got his eyes on the membership as well. So who are going to have their say. So I think Robert Jenrick's had a good sort of summer, actually, getting to know the members and getting to know the MPs. Also, Tom Tugendhat has been up and down the country, and also I think James Cleverly. I think he is just thinking at the top of my head, obviously the most senior person to have held office in that race, and I think he's making a pretty good stab of it as well. Especially Priti
Patel, she's on moves.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think Priti as well. It'd be interesting to see whether she gets down to that final two. I think she'll make it to the party conference when you have that final four who make their pitches to members. So, but I think one thing that James Cleverly and Priti have got on their side is every time Labour come under pressure when it comes to small boats, and Robert Jenrick for that matter, they really can make hay because they have that experience of being in the Home Office and trying to sort out the illegal migration crisis. Not that it's, the numbers are still high, but they do at least have that experience.
Now, I would forgive them for the fact that Parliament's in recess, so there's not much technically from Westminster they can do right now. But given that the country is in absolute crisis, given that Sir Keir Starmer's ratings are sort of sinking to a very low ebb right now, and a lot of people out there are feeling sort of existentially worried about the country at the moment, I've been wondering where the heck Rishi Sunak is. I mean, about 6 weeks ago, he was our Prime Minister. He's still the leader of the Conservative Party, and I haven't heard a peep from him in ages.
Yeah, no, exactly. The last time I saw sight of Rishi Sunak, it was only a photograph. I think he was out in California. I guess having been in that job for the best part of 2 years, having run a pretty exhausting leadership general election campaign, I think he just decided to take time off and have a break. But it does beg the question, is the real opposition at the moment being led by those 6 candidates? And Parliament will be back the first week of September, and there'll be Prime Minister's questions. There'll be the usual holding the government to account. So you just wonder whether Rishi Sunak just needed a holiday, just needed a break to get everything out of his system. But he'll be come back fighting for that month and a half, 2 months or so before the Tories decide their next leader.
I mean, talking about, where is the opposition? There is a Nigel Farage waiting in the wing saying that he wants to make his party the opposition. And there is bits of polling that have been scattered around online are suggesting that actually he's making some big gains, particularly in the sort of situation we find ourselves in now, where some of the huge issues that the country is facing haven't been answered by the previous government, aren't being answered right now by the incumbent government, and perhaps the issues as well that only characters like Nigel Farage dare tread.
Yeah, that's right. I think Reform have got a great opportunity in the next year or so. They've got that great base of having a handful of MPs. But I think it'd be interesting to see what they do in the local elections, how many candidates they actually put up, and actually see if they try and make some inroads there. There has been, obviously, Nigel Farage has been very vocal on the issue of the riots, in recent weeks. You just wonder, he's out in America, I believe, at the moment, or he's about to go. You just wonder whether he actually comes back and, do voters feel like he may be spending too much time with his, attention elsewhere? So I think that's probably one question Reform have got to ask themselves, the balance between being a good MP, a good parliamentary leader, and those outside interests. Nigel Farage may well think that he's got that balance just about right, but it'll be interesting to see what the voters think.
Yeah, no, you make a very good point, Ryan. Thank you ever so much. It's always good catching up with you. I mean, it is. I do feel at the moment the Labour Party is sort of blowing themselves up because there isn't really many voices of opposition against them, and people are looking at what's going on. And either Sir Keir Starmer's been a genius and got this right, because by calling everything far right and saying you're all despicable, we don't care about the concerns of the white working class, we want everyone to be a nice, tolerant, progressive society, whether he's actually sort of thrown a grenade into the Conservative Party leadership contest in this tug of war between left and right.
Oh no, I think you're absolutely right. By the way, Rishi Sunak was last spotted a few days ago in a pizza restaurant in Beverly Hills, where a mushroom pizza apparently cost 32 quid. So that's really what last was.
You can't just vacate the scene. You can't call a snap election and then saunter off to Beverly Hills, you big bozo.
Well, apparently what he's got a 5.7 million luxury penthouse in Santa Monica, and the suggestion is that he's looking for his next job in Silicon Valley. So
well, that doesn't.
We heard it here first.
We know he didn't want to let go of that green card. We were warned.
It's all going to be good. No, but in answer to your question, well, a couple of things there. Boris, you might remember his work on the sort of principle that he used to be the Carlsberg politician who could reach parts of the electorate that nobody else could reach, and that's what got him the 80-seat majority.
Well, let's see. He did say hasta la vista, I'll be back, so we'll soon find out. And hasta la vista, because I'll be back just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. I'm just going to read some of your messages while I've got the opportunity. And Richard from Norwich has messaged me saying, hi, Alex. I had a similar experience with a Works coffee machine, except I threw up. I'm glad you survived. And if you don't know, yesterday I had this little habit. I'm not really a coffee drinker, but I've had a soft spot for a while for the mockers that come out of our machine. And so Abby, my lovely producer, says, she just comes in and says, here's your regular, and pops it on the table. And I drank one yesterday and I was like, that tastes a bit funny. It's a bit soapy. And it's like, oh, not just that, my lips feel a bit numb and tingly, and that my tongue now feels like it's like I've had nail varnish remover. Anyway, roll forward an hour and a half later and I had to skedaddle from there early, so I think the coffee machine tried to kill me. So, just during that advert break, what does Andrew suddenly say he wants? Would you like a drink? Just water? And I said, oh yeah, whatever you do, don't go to the coffee machine. He said, oh, can I get something from the coffee machine? And we're like, don't do it. And not only that, he's ordered the mocker. I know,
and all for the sake of this glorious programme, don't blocker the mocker is what I'm saying.
Don't blocker the mocker.
We're going to have... I will do it. I'll do it. Yeah. And we'll do this. It's like roulette.
Case.
It's like coffee roulette.
It is.
A little bit of jeopardy. You've got to have a bit of jeopardy in this programme.
This is such a daring radio station.
Watch this
that we're going to see if we can kill our contributors live on air.
Live on air. Then we can get that sponsored. It's amazing. Oh, they're going wild.
I'm not sure if the Murdochs would sanction that, but, you know, I'll raise it to my boss.
Anything with an audience has got to be...
I'll see if see if they're up for it. Someone's asked me where I got my top from. Marks and Spencer. And I'm not a glamorous woman, really. Whatever I wear, you can probably guess that I got it from M&S.
Other stores are available, and you'll never need to buy anything from M&S ever again. But the great thing is, you always look glamorous in whatever you wear, and that's what they always say, is that you don't see the dress, you see the person.
I'll tell you what, I do my own makeup. My hair's in some sort of weird style I do myself. Everything I wear is
My
M&S.
hair's in a weird style I do myself.
I don't own a single designer handbag. I just don't roll like that.
But you don't need to. You don't need. You're just such a classy act. You see, this is.
I love that you're just showering me in compliments. This is amazing. I'm going to keep playing this game of doing myself down.
I love it. I'll build it up.
Big me up again.
And they're loving it on social media. They say the best double act on television. Isn't this great?
Better than Ant and Dec.
Forget Ant and Dec. Move on. We'll do the jungle together. This would be fantastic. We'll sort it out. Wouldn't that be good?
Yeah, the coffee machine doesn't kill me.
Coffee machine.
Don't bring that coffee machine to the jungle.
We'll make many visits to the dunny. You can work on that base. No, they're lovely. A lot of people are also asking what the name of that movie was. You know, we talked about the people having...
Io Capitano,
Io Capitano,
yeah,
that's
I made
the
a
one.
note of it.
So have a look. So Diane Harding was asking about that. And other people were talking about the far right and the labels. So you're right. They should never label people. And it's dismissing. There's some people who've got legitimate concerns, who are genuine protesters. Others are just louts who should absolutely clamp down on. But not everybody's far right. And it's a terrible way of dismissing those with a grievance.
Walk with me. Because I was thinking the other day about this whole concept of far right. And there I was, looking back through history at pretty bad people who exterminated entire, races, committed genocide, hyper-controlled society, authoritarian governments. And most of them seem to me pretty left, actually. And right-wing tends to mean free markets, liberties, small state, let people get on with their lives. So, to me, the far version of that is libertarianism.
Yes.
Whereas it tends to be the left who like controlling things a bit, sometimes a little bit too much. Yeah. And so I wonder, when people bang on about far right, what that even means, quite frankly. And, it's amazing that in history, the Nazis have gone down as far right, when the word Nazi comes from the German for nationalist socialist.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think some of the most gruesome, harrowing people out there are actually the far left, and they never get an airing. We don't get to ask questions about them, but there they are, turn up every single placard which is against state interests. Oh, no more fossil fuels, great, let's impoverish the country. Don't side with Israel, Israel's evil, great, let's all become anti-Semites again. All of these sort of, would-be, hippie do-gooders, to me, are probably doing the bidding of some pretty nefarious organisations and some hostile states who would quite like us to not use gas and oil, would quite like us to suddenly side with Hamas instead of Israel. And I don't think enough is being spoken about that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I don't like labels anyway, because the reality, right, what far right, right so far. I mean, what are you going to look at? The idea is this: there's a behaviour that you should look at. Forget the labels. It's rather like conspiracy theories.
Right.
If you have an alternative view, they call you a conspiracy theorist, which is supposed to be derogatory. So the idea is sometimes conspiracy theorists only have to be right once. Those who question the conspiracy need to be right all of the time. You need to make sure we question everything. Don't dismiss people with labels. They're not all far right, and lots of people have gone crazy on that sort of side. They're not.
But there's been a lot of weird things that have gone on during these riots. So we're going to get on to this story about the Pakistani web developer. But first of all, I mean, some of those louts who came out lobbing bricks, setting fire to hotels, disgusting, despicable animals, as far as I'm concerned. But the idea they've got a manifesto and matching brown shirts, to me, is a little bit far. Yeah. Most of them were just career criminals who saw what happened in Hare Hill, saw protests taking place and thought, great, this will be a grand day out for us, and I'm glad that they've been lifted. But the other thing is, you know, what started trending on Twitter was this hashtag that these are the Farage riots. The man was in Hong Kong visiting his grandson, his new grandson. It had nothing to do with him. No. The cynical political framing of this, and it's interesting, isn't it, that various people have been pointed at, especially Nigel, said, oh, well, you know, you said they're not giving us all the information. I think it's a very human question to ask when an atrocity of that scale happens, and lots of people said, what is going on here? Yes. Why are they not telling us stuff? He didn't somehow start a riot. Then, of course, we find out that there was this website, Channel 3 Now, who are the first website to jump on this and put out the name of what sounded like a Muslim man who committed that awful, disgusting crime. And a Pakistani web developer has now been tracked down in Lahore, I believe. But this was a website that at one point used to show Russian drag racing, which is actually registered in Lithuania and has its servers in Pakistan. And one thing I know from some of the other bits and bobs of work I've done in the past is whenever you've got chaos on the streets of the West, there are plenty of nefarious bot farms working to engineer it. And I think what we need to do, and in fact what I'm going to try and do with a company I know who's the best in the business at this, they audited X for Elon Musk before he went and bought it and didn't want to buy it because he found out it was 80% bots. Yes. But I want someone to have a look at all of the internet-based activity during that entire week of rioting and find out quite how much of that was emanating from bot farms in Iran, in Russia. Not just this one Pakistani web developer, but a network of hostile regimes stirring up dissent on our streets.
No, you're absolutely right. And I've started, it's good to get the professionals in on this. I've started to look at this Channel 3 website and I've been in touch with some of the people to interview them. Bizarrely, for a media organisation, they've only got 3,427 followers. Right. Tiny. The one post went into the millions afterwards. They took it down and issued an apology after, that sort of stuff. They're following 22, most of which are little local police services. That can't be the whole story. No. You're quite right. Those number of followers is not a normal sort of channel. And it was set up in January 2022 was when they set up that Twitter account. It's still up there. Yeah. We reached out to them to try and find out information. That cannot be how it started.
This is, I mean, it's definitely part of a bigger picture, and it's, I think, emblematic of what I was talking about, some pretty dodgy regimes wanting to play games with us. But again, it's being scapegoated, and I feel like constantly these things are scapegoated because the government don't want to have the difficult conversations of, before this was hijacked by career criminals who just wanted to do despicable acts. The very first protests actually were quite calm.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference.
And people seem to have forgotten that.
And I think this is right. And again, go back to language. It's my tool as a lawyer. That's what you talk about. Language is so important. There are some things which are protests, which are legitimate airings of grief. Other things are riots with criminals and thugs. And to hijack the grief of the poor families with the murdered 3 little girls to go and nick a television set is abhorrent. It's got nothing to do. And even the families and the people in the community were saying, look, don't hijack our grief. We want you to stop. We don't want the riots on the streets. So that's the abhorrent bit. It's not a protest. The protest is entirely different, and you can have a legitimate right to protest. Some of these people are just thugs.
But I get the impression that Sir Keir Starmer is sitting back and smiling and framing all of this very politically. He's turning this into a battle of right, evil, riot, left-wing, good, Labour. And I think that's incredibly divisive and incredibly dangerous, because it's not going to close Pandora's box.
No, you're absolutely right. We're living in a very diseased information age. We're in a very divided age. People are stoking the fire, fueling the fire, if you like. The media can also have been playing a part in this. They're stoking up this sort of prejudices and so on and so forth. We need to turn down the narrative. We need to be careful of the language that we use. We need to call out the people, as you say, who are doing wrong. And as we said earlier in this great programme, it's justice is blind. If you make sure we have equal treatment of everybody who commits criminality, and you make sure it's swift justice for everybody, don't put labels on them other than the criminals, and this is the procedure that we follow, that's the way to deal with these issues. Not just call it put the labels on, or you're far right or whatever it is. They're criminals, some of these people, and they're not protesters, and you need to look at that.
Yeah, and I think that I do think, if you're going to talk about people hijacking protests, that there's also something to me a little unpleasant about the Prime Minister of this country, to me, politicising this even more. Yeah, using it for political advantage, perhaps. Well, that, to me, is quite a cynical and disturbing move.
Well, the cynical and disturbing move as well is when people question, they say, you're working backwards. Why are they doing this? Do they want to introduce greater restrictions to the general people? Because the means justify, or the end justifies the means. So you suddenly turn around, there's all these rights, therefore got to clamp down on liberties and so on and so forth. And this whole nonsense about the prisons, which are already bursting at the seams, but you could get one in, one out and all that sort of stuff, is absolute nonsense. We need to address the fundamental issue, but also to look at why is there so much problems at the moment in this sort of thing. And it's being stoked in fear. It was Edward Bernays, who's the father of PR, as you know very well. Edward Bernays, he said that the easiest way to persuade anybody about anything is through fear. It's the strongest human emotion. So you make people scared, and then you can introduce all sorts of legislation and restrictions.
Well, this is the thing, and I think that's what I find a bit cynical. I understand he had to crack down on those riots and stop them happening again. We do not need that on the streets of this country. But he has left a lot of ordinary people feeling quite frightened. And I feel like he should know that. I don't think he's a stupid man. You know, if I sit here and I get messages from listeners, and I look on social media and I see things written in newspapers and the sort of discussions commentators are having, he must be quite aware right now that there is a subset of society who suddenly feel rather afraid. And I think that as Prime Minister, he governs for all of us, whether we voted for him or not. And I think long gone, long past now is the time where he should have made an address from outside Downing Street and addressed the whole country and reassured everybody, yes, chastise and do not condone those who committed heinous crimes, but talk about, we understand that there are frustrations. We know that people are struggling at the moment. And I'm here to serve all of you.
Absolutely.
And I think he's not done that. What he has done is gone whoosh, and cleaved the divide even deeper. Yeah,
no, you're so right, Alex. And I think that's what you need. You want a leader who basically unites everybody. And it's not just about any part of society being responsible for that. It's basically, as a community, you need to build that back up. One of the wonderful things about living in London, it's one of the most diverse cities in the world. I worked very closely with Boris beforehand during the Olympics on that sort of stuff. And he would always make the speech saying that people can come from any part in the world and they could be greeted by somebody from their own country with their own cuisine and so on and so forth. The glorious thing about London, it's a wonderful melting pot and we should celebrate that. The difficulty now is that people have become tribal. And people are very scared about the other people in a different tribe, and they're pitching people against each other, and that is appalling and needs to stop.
I tell you what I think is going on here as well. Something else that's not really been spoken about. I think a lot of this is classism. And I'll explain to you why. So I was horrified when I had Baroness Claire Fox on the programme. She was talking about the anti-racism protest in Walthamstow, and she told me that at one point the protesters had all gathered around outside a Wetherspoons and were shouting into the Wetherspoons, "Nazi scum off our street." That to me is just a load of privileged middle-class people shouting disgusting things at the men and women who do things like, I don't know, drive the lorries that put the food on the supermarket shelves that they then eat. The porters who push people about in wheelchairs in hospitals. You know, I'm not having that. I think we've got so much horrific classism now, dressed up as this sort of faux moral superiority, and I'm not standing for it because I think we've beaten down on the working classes enough here. And I think that there's a part of this that the Labour Party understand that those people aren't going to vote Labour anymore. And when we talk about, you're talking about London being so diverse. And how wonderful is it that people can come and bring their cuisine and bring their culture. And if you turn around and go, well, they don't speak the language, it's like we must translate things for them. Yet put that in the context of British people who have gone to live in Spain and want to have fish and chips and drink a pint of lager. And the same people who say, isn't that what's wonderful about London, would call those people despicable. They would call them lazy. They'd say, you've not made any effort, you're vile. This is my problem at the moment, and I think that unless we start addressing that huge gulf, the sheer snobbery and demonisation of our working classes, we're not going to heal any of our issues.
And you're so right. And what we have to, nobody should live in fear. You know, this is the horrendous thing. And what happens, we get so desensitised, if you like, with statistics about people dying every day, thousands upon thousands. It's not until you personify it, until you know the person and the tragedy with the super yacht and so on and so forth, that just a handful of people, it's awful, absolutely awful. But that's all over the front pages. The reality is that every single day, thousands upon thousands of people are dying. And every single one of those is an absolute tragedy, and we need to look at that as well. But the whole thing, I mean, the great thing about Joe Biden, I was actually never thinking about that in the sentence.
First time that's ever been heard on a radio station.
And it's a campaign which will never be able to run ever. But Joe Biden, what I loved about him, he missed a trick, because his name, Joe Biden, is an anagram of be joined. And if you could run that as a campaign in this fragmented world, he could have got lots of people behind him.
What's an anagram of Kamala Harris? You've got an advert break to figure it out, and we'll let you know just after this. Don't go anywhere.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, welcome back, and brilliant messages we have got. Can I just say, Celia in Dorset, who decided she wanted to play our anagram game, and said that an anagram of Virginia Bottomley, who was, of course, a member of Margaret Thatcher's government, is I'm an evil Tory bigot. Brilliant work. Well done, Celia. And Ben from Stockwell has messaged saying most terrorists are actually educated at a higher education level. Well, that may be the case. I know there are certainly some who emanated from places like Westminster University in this country. But we were talking more about people who fail to learn the language.
I think that's
and integrate or don't necessarily immediately adopt our cultural mores because they haven't been exposed to them, perhaps. But I do take your point, Ben, who also says, stop defending the rioters, racist rioters. I don't think there's any justification for attacking the police in places of worship or hotels for asylum seekers. No, Ben, I totally agree. I don't think at any point
no,
defending the rioters.
I think that was a different programme. I think this one, well, not on this one. I think we're very clear.
I think we've been very clear about it. I think I've used words like feral and
I think feral's yes, and no, abhorrent. We've used that a lot of times. So no, it's good to point it out though, because and it gives a good example. People misunderstand what's said.
Well, sometimes they want to think you're saying a certain thing and sort of decide you're saying a certain thing without listening to what you're saying.
What was that? Yeah, no, but thank you. We're here all week. But I love this. Is Judith who's been lovely. Some lovely comments. You make good listening. Love the combo is what they're saying. It's got to be fantastic. Peter Mullins as well. We've got Lucia and various others. They're loving this sort of stuff. What I like about it is the light and shade, because you can do some really heavy stuff, which we need to unpack in a sensible way.
Really do.
But also have a laugh along the way. And talking about that, I've got the coffee now.
Oh, yes, by the way, here it is. Tell me if it tastes of chemicals. Go and have a swig.
It smells okay. So a Talk mug available at all good shops. This is good. I quite like that. You know, that is the mocha.
I think the mocha is so strong it masks the line cleaner.
That's the thing.
I'm hoping I was just unlucky, but we'll see how you fare in the next hour.
It's got to be good.
Let's talk now to Alexander, who is in Plymouth.
Hello, Alexander.
Hi, Alex, how are you feeling now?
Yeah, I'm a lot better, but we're going to see how Andrew feels in another hour, because he's being my laboratory rat.
I've got it.
He's got the mocha. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I've got a bit of an analysis on what's going on with the Labour Party, and something was said yesterday about how Keir Starmer has to come out and fix these issues, otherwise there's been pandemonium. But I have a different take on this. I'm not a fan of the Labour Party, but I think I see where he's going with this. It's a little bit of a lengthy analysis, if you'll forgive me, but please cut across me if I'm taking too long. I'll go through it really fast, but essentially we need to understand that he is a globalist and a socialist. He's attracted, therefore, to foreign principles and appears to have rallied the cabinet behind the idea of a form of social organization. That organization of society has to be one where everything is reduced to the lowest common denominator so as to remove factors of unreliability or predictability. And therefore, any peaks and troughs in that trend line is going to represent a problem for a socialist with a severe Marxist or rather Stalinist disposition. And due to the speed at which comparatively minor offences have been tried under more draconian legislation, it's kind of suiting that Stalinist approach. I think two things are happening. The Labour Party has engaged in a social experiment to separate the wheat from the chaff, or those who will comply and those who will not. And the Labour Party is entrenching policies and ideologies that will make it nearly impossible to undo uprisals from the electorate when the next party tries to get in.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack. I'm going to pause you there because I should have been taking notes, frankly. I felt like I was at a university lecture. No, I think what you make some really interesting points, and it's interesting because you've reflected what a lot of people are feeling at the moment, and we touched on this before. Yes. The sense that sort of separating society, you called it the wheat from the chaff, but there is this sense that he has sort of corralled, let's say, one side and another, and that there is this sense that people do feel like they are now feeling a lot more controlled, perhaps, under Sir Keir Starmer than they were under the previous government. It's not by chance that people are talking about Sir Keir Stalin, for instance. It just kind of rolls off the tongue, unfortunately. Of course, he is a left-wing man, and there's been a lot of debate, actually. You speak to Peter Hitchens, who says, oh, gosh, this man is more left-wing than Jeremy Corbyn, but he's a bit like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's better at hiding it. And then there are others who say, he did that thing where he was a hippie and he might have gone on to work in a workers' camp led by a Czechoslovakian Soviet spy back in the day. But he's been on a journey and now he's a centrist dad. And I think perhaps it's too early to really understand which direction he's going in. And also what I'd say is this, when you are from the other side of politics and you've suddenly got an opposition government in power, your trust for what they're doing is going to be less. Yes. Right? So as somebody who naturally has found herself on the right wing of politics, I don't really know what I am, you get a Labour government in who's sort of, been faced with difficult circumstances and have to take difficult decisions, and naturally that spooks me out. They frighten me more than, say, if this was a Conservative Party doing it. Right. Not that I'd love a Conservative Party doing this either. I do worry about things like freedom of speech. But I think there's also that naturally inbuilt prejudice that we all have. And so perhaps, what do you think about, what Alexander was saying about quite how socialist Mr. Starmer may be?
Yes. Well, I think you're absolutely right. And we're all starting with prejudice. As soon as somebody comes in or as soon as a name happens to be made or mentioned, all of your prejudices come into that sort of stuff. What Alexander's shown is that the general audience out there are much, much cleverer than people give them credit for. Right. You have a
I've got a very discerning audience.
No, haven't you? You've got the best audience, the most intelligent audience, the beautifulest audience ever.
They are.
They
are see them all
gorgeous,
right now.
gorgeous,
so
absolutely. But what I love about it, they think. And what politicians do, they tend to sort of demean the people. They think they don't think. They think they give you little sound bites and they fob them off. If you explain the situation, present the facts, then people can make informed decisions. Yeah. And what we always urge people to do is don't have your prejudices. Just because somebody might have done something in the past and they might have a particular policy, it doesn't mean that policy's wrong. What we need to do is unpack that policy, get the details, and what Alexander, he's clearly thought about that. As you say, he was ready to do the whole 3 hours, and he was brilliant.
I know, Alexander. What are you doing next week, by the way? Because Andrew might not be around.
I still have this.
Andrew might not be around.
Exactly.
Quite literally. Alexander, thank you ever so much for your call. Let's have a very quick word with Saeed, who's in London. And Saeed, sorry, I don't have a great deal of time to talk to you before we go to advert break, but let me know what's on your mind.
Hi, Saeed.
Look, hello, hi. Yeah, look, I heard you talking about how the threat from the far left and that the Nazis were actually socialists. And I think that's quite a wrong interpretation of history, because Hitler was an evil man and he was using the word socialist as a pure propaganda device. Because the first thing he did when he came to power is that he started throwing the communists and the socialists into concentration camps. And he was funded and supported by all the big businessmen in Germany, because they were so terrified about the rise of communism that they teamed up with him, they funded him, they supported him. So I think you can say all sorts of things about socialism and whether it's right, but calling them Nazis is a bit unfair.
Do you know, it's interesting, because you really, said something that's quite close to my heart, because I just said earlier, I've often found myself on the right of politics, but I don't necessarily see myself as right-wing. And I think the whole concept of left and right is a bit dead now.
It is, totally dead.
What we actually have, and some people have sort of created this thing called a political compass. And I think that, and it talks about whether you are more socially conservative or socially liberal, whether you are more free marketeer or more state-controlled. And I think we'll find ourselves on different parts of that very complex compass with nuance. But you'll be pleased to know, Saeed, that Susan has messaged it with what I think is a really important and valid point. Because if you actually use that political compass and map both fascist and communist governments, they end up at exactly the same place. And Susan said, Alex, I lived in Spain when Franco ruled. Not nice. But I cannot see the difference between fascists and communists. And I think that's the thing, it's authoritarianism and it's extremism that we need to be worried about, which is why personally I don't like the lazy labelling of calling things far right, far left. I think it's too much of a blunt tool, and it's upset a lot of people out there, and I think it's, like I said, it's sort of, to me, it's thrown accelerant onto tensions, because now anyone who might sort of want to raise, perfectly valid issues about immigration or sensitive topics might run the risk of being called far right.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Saeed makes some brilliant points. And what I love about it, I always say that the history it repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history.
Right.
So when you have Saeed coming in there and put things in perspective, that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. What's also right, and I say, forget the parties, forget the party systems. Why don't we look at the policies? Because there's so much that unites us rather than that which divides us.
Arguably the most right-wing government we've had in recent years was Tony Blair.
There you go. It's true. It's true. So look at the policies, look at what unites us. We should be the United Kingdom. It's the most divided kingdom at the moment. We should get back to that. Look at what unites us. Look at those common grounds about decency, about family, about making sure that people are looked after, and we'll be a much better place.
Oh, that's sort of a Dr. Phil moment from you. Nice way to go into adverts. Right, do come back, because we're going to be looking into the post office scandal. We haven't spoken about this for a while. It's rather dropped off the agenda, but some pretty grim lawyers, like the one sitting opposite me, have been making some good money out of that. That's after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Well, this young man sitting opposite me, who we're still trying to test whether the coffee machine is a sort of killing machine at this point. He's still here.
I'm still here. I'm still very comfortable.
But would we miss one less barrister in this world?
Ah.
Yeah. Segueing on to very nice. I'm the queen of segues tonight.
You are the queen of segues tonight. Come on.
Because actually, it turns out that the amount paid to 15 firms and 2 barristers' chambers after the Post Office Horizon scandal is basically the same as the payouts for victims. We can talk now to somebody who has been on the receiving end of some pretty appalling behaviour by the Post Office, Tim Bretnall, who himself is a former sub-postmaster. Tim, I mean, you know, it's taking so long for justice to be delivered, for compensation to get where it needs. And when we listen to the personal stories of people like you, and then we listen to people who are making probably as much money, if not more money, than you could ever hope to receive off the back of this, defending the firms that screwed you over, for want of a better phrase, sorry, Ofcom. It must stick in your craw somewhat.
Yes, very much so. And just a point to note as we start, the 250 million in legal fees is just the Post Office's legal fees. That doesn't count the government's legal fees in this. I mean, the total legal spend is probably closer to double that 250 million.
That's absolutely... I mean, and what you know, the other thing that I think here that we're not talking about enough is it was quite clear that Horizon had issues with their computer system, that Horizon tried to potentially also help cover this up. And I wonder why, when it comes to paying compensation to you, who very richly deserves it, but also the legal fees of lawyers and the government and so on and so forth, that it falls upon the taxpayer and it doesn't seem to be falling on Horizon.
Yeah, well, the people that made Horizon Fujitsu are culpable in this because they provided witnesses and information to court cases that ended up with us being convicted. But we have to remember that the main villain is the government-owned Post Office, because they're the people that decided to fight the group of us along with Alan Bates in 2019, and for almost a decade before that, sort of tried to stonewall us, steamroller us, and deny that there was anything wrong at all. When you know, they're the people that prosecuted us. The Post Office is the organisation that put us in prison.
Talk to me about your own personal experience, because I always think it's important to get to the heart of the matter, to personify an issue, so people are reminded really of what went on. Tell us about what happened to you.
Well, I bought my local village shop with my savings, along with help from my parents, back in 2005. I was audited in 2010 when a £22,500 shortfall was found. The Post Office demanded that I paid that back to avoid being charged with theft. As soon as I had paid that back with further savings and from the business and from help from other people, they charged me with false accounting, sacked me and gave me a criminal record for over a decade.
That's awful. How did that make you feel? I mean, did you... That must have been an incredibly stressful time, to put it mildly.
It was horrific, because I was one of the many people who, when it happened to me, and I sort of questioned the Post Office and said, well, I know I haven't done anything wrong or criminal, what's going on? They told me that I was the only person having problems like this. They did that to many of us. So for the first few years, I thought I was totally on my own, and almost began to doubt myself and think, well, you know, the Post Office is owned by the government. It had the Queen's crown on top of it. When they took me to court, it was the Queen versus me. So you start to doubt your own memories or thought processes on it and think perhaps you had caused this problem yourself. And it's only when Alan Bates came along and organised us into a group that we started to realise that it wasn't, you know, us.
And how far are you down the road towards proper compensation?
Well, my conviction was overturned in the summer of 2021. In the last 3 years, not a lot has happened. My full claim has been served on the post office. But I know from people in my group who are a little bit ahead of me in the scheme that they report back that it's still almost like being in litigation, and we're having to claw every sort of penny that we're due from their grasp.
I mean, the difficulty here, Andrew, to bring it back to the lawyer side, is you need lawyers, and lawyers have a job to do. They have to defend both the innocent, but also they have to defend people accused of things. And it's a very difficult and technical job. You have to have a brilliant grasp of the law. Every single word, every way you put a comma in a sentence, it all matters. And this is a hugely serious issue. And, you need the best of the best to be able to navigate the complexities of all of this. But it does seem that, the mistakes that have been repeatedly made, the way that people like Tim were treated, it's just, the justice of it just seems completely not there.
You're absolutely right. I've got a couple of points on this. It was an absolute scandal. Absolute scandal. People not only, as Tim explained, people went to jail, some people took their lives. It was absolutely appalling. It took an ITV drama for people to shine the spotlight. So Mr. Bates versus the Post Office was absolutely that sort of stuff. It is horrendous. I always say history repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And we have a number of these scandals. We've got the blood infected blood scandal. We need to deal with these a lot quicker. On lawyers' fees, just to put it in perspective, we put them side by side. It sounds horrendous. Going back to our headline things, these were 15 firms, 2 barristers' chambers since 2014, so it's 10 years. One firm alone, Herbert Smith Freehills, according to this Freedom of Information request, was paid 163.6 million. So one of the firms was that.
They're just over there.
They are very close. But what they say, it involves hundreds of our staff over a number of years.
So that's
what you need to look at. And
one person.
It's not one person walking off with a big pocket. So the figures are horrendous. The biggest scandal, I'm sure Tim will say this as well, is what happened to their lives. And I think you can never, no amount of money can repay that.
We'll never compensate that. Tim, thank you ever so much for joining us. We're going to keep talking about it and keep this in the news cycle. Don't go anywhere. There is still an hour more of Alex and Andrew to come.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back, and unfortunately not here at the 17th floor of Talk Towers, but somewhere else in the UK there's going to be the first drugs consumption room opening in October. That was the most risky segue I've ever done.
You and your segues today.
My drugs, ladies and gentlemen,
yes.
look like this. This is just...
High juice, sponsored by somebody else.
M&S Mediterranean Orange High Juice, made of 50% fruit juice. That is how I rock and roll. But, you know, talking about the debate about how we deal with drugs.
Yes.
Or go on and on and on. They've given up on the war against drugs. They've realised that it's massive international cartels. It's just so difficult to stop this stuff coming into the country. And there's the debate around whether actually legalising things would help, because then you can regulate them and you know who's taking what. There would still be a black market, but perhaps it'd be lessened and you're taking control to some degree out of the hands of criminals. But then there's also a lot of debate around the best way to treat people who have drugs. And, you know, when I was at the BBC back in my youth, I actually helped work on an investigation into children with drug addictions, because you've got parts of South Wales Valley in particular where children are taking heroin. It's awful. And part of this investigation I did, I spoke to a man who was a huge advocate that the best way of treating heroin addicts is with heroin, actually, giving them heroin and constantly reducing the dose, because if you give them any of the replacements, they then get addicted to those. Sometimes they don't even take it. They'll go onto the street, sell methadone, for example, to buy more heroin. But actually, if you give them what they crave and what they want and then reduce down, it can be some of the safest ways of treating things. But of course, this is always a controversial policy, because people look on the tin and just go, drugs should be illegal. Why are we setting up somewhere for people to go and take illegal drugs? Well, let's speak now to Lucy Beresford, who is a psychologist, about this. I have some sympathy. I don't really have, you know, I'm somebody who doesn't do drugs. I have very little sympathy with particularly the middle classes who preach ethics and values to the rest of us and then go on a night out and taking cocaine quite wantonly, and thus sort of, you know, sending kids over county lines to be, you know, killed in drug violence and funding terrorism and people trafficking and a whole cohort. I think there needs to be more of a PR campaign against, if you think you're taking cocaine, perhaps look at the network of, you know, illegality behind you and who suffers. But when it comes to treating people with addictions, I actually have a degree of sympathy with this approach. But I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know whether I'm right to or not. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm very conflicted, and I think it rather depends on what you want a particular outcome to achieve. So there's a lot been made of these drug treatment rooms, drug consumption rooms, as they're often known, across Europe, and whether they're actually working, whether they are worth the investment. And many people assume that they exist in order to stop drug takers taking drugs. And that's actually not the case. What you're trying to achieve is fewer deaths as a result of overdoses or people taking compromised products, or, as you say, perhaps weaning them off a particular hardcore drug onto something less hardcore. And it's also about trying to reduce crime in local areas that might be linked to drug taking. And it's also about trying to improve the lives of the people who live in the area whose lives are blighted by any kind of incidents to do with maybe watching people have overdoses or finding someone on your doorstep. Now, if that's your benchmark for what you want to eliminate or reduce, drug consumption rooms have a very good track record. There's been plenty of research from Sydney, from Vancouver, not just in Europe, that actually says quite a lot of those elements of the drug-taking scene can be improved. But I do still remain to be convinced as to whether a drug consumption program using rooms such as are about to be opened in Glasgow can actually wean people off their drugs. In fact, there is some argument to say that it actually perpetuates the drug taking, because in a way the drug users find a different family, a different tribe to take drugs with, and it almost normalizes the behavior.
How difficult is it to get people who might have sort of predisposal to addictive behaviour, who have become locked in that cycle of drug addiction and drug dependency. How easy is it to actually get them off drugs, to break that cycle? What sort of success rates might we be looking at?
Well, the success rate also has to be looked in tandem with the relapse rate. And it does depend on why someone is taking drugs. So as a psychotherapist, I'm trained to look at the psychological motivation behind someone's actions or behavior. And for some people, it's very much about a coping strategy. And for those, the research suggests that actually if you can work on the deeply embedded issues that have perhaps propelled someone to take drugs, then actually you might have a higher success rate. But in terms of people who perhaps grew up in families where there was drug taking or there was illicit substance misuse, and it was part of what you witnessed maybe as a child growing up, it can be a lot harder. And also I think we have to recognize that taking drugs isn't just a risk, isn't just about the harmful substance that you take. It's also about the impact that it has on your physiology. So in terms of the brain degradation, that, you know, if your brain cells have been killed off because of the drugs that you've been taking, and I would also include alcohol with that, then it's going to be much harder for you to wean yourself off, even with a cohort of people around you who are motivating you and supporting you. It is hard. And that's why I feel so conflicted about drug consumption rooms, because they are trying to tackle some aspect of it. But for sure, we need so much more money thrown at this particular problem. But, you know, and I come from the private sector where there has been a lot of money and I used to work at the Priory, which has a huge drug and alcohol rehabilitation unit. And the success rate there is relatively high, but it's not as high as it should be, and we just need more money across the board.
Yeah, Andrew.
So, I mean, it's always lovely to see you, Lucy, and a joy to share a studio with you. The report, I just want to pick you up on one thing, and whether you agree with it, was Alan Casey, who's in this particular thing. He says it's still widely recognised that involvement in a treatment programme substantially improves someone's chances of getting the right support mechanisms. Do you support what he says?
Well, I think once you're in the system, there is actually a gateway to being flagged up within the community that you might actually get more help and more support.
Right.
And what he's drawing attention to is the number of people who go under the radar, who for whatever reason are not presenting in pharmacies, or they're not presenting in rehab clinics or at their GP services. They want to go under the radar because they know that what they're doing fundamentally is illegal. And this speaks to Alex's point earlier about whether you should decriminalise drug taking. But if you can get someone into a drug consumption room, and as a result of that, they've then got a pathway to wider support, that would be great.
Yes.
But we do have to recognise that quite a lot of people, this is their lifestyle. And what you're trying to dismantle with a great deal of care and compassion is every single aspect of that person's life. Their friendship group, maybe their families, maybe where they live, the fact that they don't have an income, and the fact that all of that is being propped up by drug use. So it's a really complicated picture. He's definitely onto something there, and if you can get someone in treatment as a result of these rooms, that would be brilliant.
Yeah. And that's the key, isn't it, Lucy? I think that's absolutely right, is you're looking at a greater understanding, because we're not experts on these matters. You have to rely on experts, and sometimes we over-rely on experts. But if it's getting results, then we should look at it and try and get a better understanding.
So something I want to ask you, Lucy, is I've noticed, as someone who's been living in London on and off, but for the best part of a decade, probably over a decade now if I do the maths, that there's been a huge change in the normalisation of drug taking. It has become very much, you know, I think at a lot of middle-class dinner parties, people get out the wrap of cocaine. When there was sort of a swab done of toilets in Parliament, every single one of them came back with results of that. If you walk down the streets of London, you often walk through the miasma of somebody's spliff. And I think that that something that we've lost in society is a sense of shame when it comes to drug taking, that we've become very liberal about it, and attitudes have become very liberal about it. And I mentioned earlier about the fact that I get the impression that there's a lot of middle-class people who will quote, you know, all sorts of moral viewpoints to us and then go and, you know, indulge in illicit drug taking. And perhaps if we started off by trying to shame those people who prop up a lot of this sort of nefarious network, that could be a potentially interesting public health approach.
It would be interesting and completely counterproductive.
Oh, okay.
Because shame doesn't work at all. If I were to shame you about anything at all, Alex, I'm sure you're blameless in every area of your life. But if for some strange reason I could think of something and I tried to shame you around that, it would make not the slightest bit of difference. In fact, it would harden your resolve. It would make you retreat from me. You wouldn't listen to me. Shame is the most withering, destructive concept in psychology. Okay. And the idea that we have to somehow, I think you can be very hardline about drugs, which I am. I wouldn't decriminalize any drugs whatsoever because I've seen the harm that it can cause in the hospital that I've worked. And yet at the same time, compassion is the key. Shame does not work. It makes people retreat and it makes people reach for the drug even more. I would just pick up on one thing. Andrew made a great point, which is that if it works, you know, if it gets results, then maybe we should stick with it. But I state again, what are those results that one is focusing on? Is it about the reduction in drug-fueled crime? That would be great. Everybody wants that. But at the same time, what we really want is fewer people taking drugs.
Oh, no,
and
absolutely. And as you say, it's looking at that, and as you say, compassion, not shame, is something to look at. And it's that understanding, if you can understand what the causes are and address those causes, but in the meantime, look at the way.
Yeah, I think I just need to tweak my sort of nascent public health campaign, just to sort of play on people's compassion. Yes. But you do realise when you buy cocaine and you buy cannabis that there are young kids losing their lives and all the rest of it. So I take your pointer, Lucy, and it's a really interesting one, actually. Lucy Beresford, thank you ever so much.
Good to see you, Lucy.
I mean, it's a topic that's never going to go away. I mean, drug use in this country, to me,
I think you're right.
And I was impressed. I think, with a lot of the violent crime we're seeing, knife crime, psychosis.
And again, looking at the root cause, I like the fact you used miasma. I thought it was a glorious word right away. Your wonderful word salads, much better than commoner, as how to pronounce her name, is the reality of that sort of stuff. No, you're right. We need to look at what are these causes in society, and I think that part of it's to do with role models. And we need some really strong, positive role models. But it's also, they say it takes a village to bring up a child. It's not just about the families, it's not just blaming the police, it's not just about the media. It takes everybody. And what we need are better values in society.
I just think a lot of woke people have an inbuilt herd instinct about them when it comes to this is what the moral thing is to do, whether they're right or wrong. And a lot of those same woke people are the ones propping up.
Absolutely. And Lucy makes a great point. Don't shame. It's not shame, it's compassion.
It's about make it trendy to not take drugs.
Exactly.
There you go.
There you go.
That's my public health policy. Right, on that note, I'm going to take a short break now, but I've got a brilliant guest coming up after the break. I spotted this story in the newspaper this morning, and I said to Samara, my incredible producer, we have to find her. She basically is a UK super cleaner, and you wouldn't believe some of the stuff she has seen. We're back after this. Which during the advert break, Andrew and I have decided that we're going to roll out the Alex Phillips anti-drugs public information campaign. It's going to look a bit like this. It's going to have a billboard, and it's going to be everywhere on the London Underground. You know, I'll get Sadiq Khan to put mate at the top of it, and it will say, thinking of getting a cheeky wrap for your party tonight? Yeah. Did you know that as a result of you doing that, 7 kids are going to get stabbed, £25 billion going to go into the hands of terrorists and people traffickers, 50 people are going to have overdoses. You still want to take those drugs?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we were talking about this, weren't we? I mean, Lucy's lovely. I know many studios I've shared with her, but I'm not sure she's right about shame. I think shame and image in society. We're in a society where you're dependent on likes. People tweet little things. Here's a picture of my cappuccino. Here's a picture of my funny coffee.
Because then you can't really sit there and go like, oh, we know the ghastly Conservative Party, oh, reform. You can't think, oh, we should protect all the migrants on the boats.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I do think that, and I said before, the father of PR, Edward Bernays, he said that fear is the most persuasive thing of all. I do think shame is also a really strong emotion, and I think it would be very persuasive. So I like your campaign. I think we should look at that. Be interesting to hear what people have to say, but I think shaming for some people, compassion for others, understanding on both is important.
Shame among the woketrons is that it's sort of like kryptonite to them, isn't it? They just can't, they hate it. Is kryptonite the one I mean, the one that's sort of toxic? It's like mocha. Mocha to me.
Mocha. No, kryptonite, it was Superman, it was Krypton, no, Kryptonite, that's the one. Yeah.
Can you tell your lovely guest Lucy to have a conversation with Keir Starmer? Perhaps he needs to not shame the public and show people compassion for their concerns about immigration.
Well, there you go.
I think very true. And this one, I love it when I see a message that's going to really facilitate my next segue.
Ooh.
So thank you, Colin. Colin says, sorry, Alex, but you've got a stain on your new M&S top.
Oh, no!
I know. It's not that new, actually, but...
Well, this is when we do an advert for a detergent.
Do you know what I need? Do you know what I need? I need someone who really knows a thing or two about cleaning.
Come on, these segues are just so good.
Know. So, without further ado, I'm just going to introduce her, Libby Denny.
Hey.
Because Libby, hi, Libby.
Hey, Libby.
Hi. I saw your story in The Sun today and I was like, get Libby on. I want to know all about your life, your experiences, how you got into this, what you've seen. Just put it very quickly. It's basically, you scrubbed over 2,000 houses and you're basically a super cleaner. You go in to where other cleaners dare not tread and deal with things that other people could only ever imagine in their worst nightmares. How did you get into it, first of all?
So basically, it all stemmed from my dad. My dad's done this sort of work for years, and obviously I needed a job, so I went to work with him, and I've never looked back.
And how do you get these sort of big projects? Are they all big projects, or do people sort of come to you and go, yeah, no, I'm not going through that front door, that's a job for our Libby?
Yeah, well, to be honest, you get known for doing it. So once you do one, I get a lot of them because obviously I post on social media, so a lot of people know that I do that sort of work. And obviously, you know, it's like social services, you'll get referrals and stuff like that, so yeah.
I mean, are there individuals who basically live in absolute diabolical, disgusting, vile conditions and sort of get in touch with you? Or are the worst things largely when, you know, I don't know, a squatter's been vacated or someone has sort of passed on from a particular address?
Yeah, it tends to be other people that reach out for them. So say if they've got adult social workers and stuff like that, they'll see the condition they're living in. It can be a family member or, like you say, like when they've passed or, you know, drug users.
Now, I know what everyone wants to know. We all want to know the sort of horrible, disgusting, vile things that you've had to deal with. And it's coming up to 9:30. I think I can sort of announce that we are now beyond the childhood section of broadcasting. So come on, give us the worst.
Well, I have to laugh. Just as I was waiting to come on here, there was a moth flying around my kitchen, and I thought, I can't come on screaming at a moth when I've dealt with what I've done before. So I'm slapping it with my slipper. But yeah, honestly, we've seen it all. We've seen needles sticking out of walls. We've had to move mattresses where a man's been laid dead for 3 months, sorry. God. There was a bathroom where the adult nappies was knee high. And obviously there was all faeces in them, used adult nappies. And then what had been happening was the back of the toilet was leaking every time they was flushing it. So obviously all the sewage was leaking into the nappies and it soaked it up. So we had to go in with shovels and shovel it out. So yeah.
My God. I mean, I just can't. From mountains, you've also in the article, from mountains of rubbish to bottles full of wee. I mean, has there ever been anything that you've turned up and you've just gone, nah? Just set the place on fire.
Yeah, well, sometimes I do think like that. But if we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. You know, and you just sort of, you get immune to it. It just becomes, you know, nothing phases you.
Have you, I mean, that journey to immunity must have been a pretty rocky road at times. I mean, do you have to sometimes sort of go into houses in like a full hazmat suit, you know, sort of like protective clothing, face mask?
Yeah, most definitely. We've got to have, you know, like the boots, like steel-toe cap boots, you know, like the respirator masks, the big ones, suits, goggles sometimes. A handy trick is putting Vicks under your nose with a mask on. That helps with the smell sometimes.
My goodness. And do they pay you well for this?
Yeah, well, we've got staff to pay and we have tipping to pay. So, but we do, you know, we average out about £25 per hour for like an environmental clean.
25 quid an hour for an environment? That's not enough, Lucy. I'm sorry, Libby. Oh, sorry, Lucy. This is the previous guest. Libby, that's not enough.
Yeah, well, it's what we charge. So yeah.
It's amazing.
It does sound amazing. I'd love to see you, Libby. They always say where there's muck, there's brass. And in the article which we've seen, it says you earn £7,000 a week, which is £364,000 a year. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's what the business can turn over. Obviously, out of that, I've got my expenses. Yes. We've got tipping. You know, some jobs we can do. The tipping can be anywhere up to £3,000, depending on what we're getting rid of. So yeah,
Yeah, OK, yeah, talk about that, actually, because you must sort of be back and forwards to the old landfill quite a lot, and they're like, here she comes again. What sort of treasure have you got this time?
Yeah, well, we're well known on the tipping yards. They're definitely around here. But, yeah, we're always there, and, yeah.
Libby, I think you're an absolute superwoman. Are you really tidy yourself at home? Are you one of these people that because you go and tidy some of those horrible things, you know, on a day-to-day life, when you've got some dirty dishes, you're like, I'll do it in the morning?
We're very OCD in this house, and sometimes when I get back from jobs, I could literally roll around on my carpet and I'm like, oh, this is place.
What is the one thing, before I let you go, what is the one thing that, you know, if you have to face it, it's the thing that sort of makes you think, I don't want to go to work today?
It's probably the smells that's the worst thing, because obviously, as you can imagine, you know, there's no escaping smells. So that's sometimes like the thing that could be like, you know, I'm just going to have to run outside for a second.
Oh, do you know, you could do with a good bout of COVID then, couldn't you? Libby, I think you're an absolute Wonder Woman. I think you're fascinating and brilliant and, you know, go well and up your blimmin' alley where 25 quid an hour.
25 quid, it does, for the miasma of muck.
For the miasma of muck, for faecal matter and needles coming out of walls. I mean, Libby, I think you're worth £1 million an hour, quite frankly. You're absolutely golden. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and fascinating. Libby Denny, ladies and gentlemen.
Nice to see Libby, well done.
I know, I love her.
I'd say what, we have got such glorious characters in this country.
I know.
And shining a spotlight on these wonderful characters like Libby is a brilliant thing to do. We should do that on a regular basis, because I was talking about role models earlier. Yeah. Society would be so much better if we can look at the great people in this world and this wonderful country that we have and work on that sort of basis.
And, you know, this is, I'm not sort of making any assumptions of where Libby likes to go and drink, but this is where I was so heartbroken and just angry and disturbed when Claire Fox told me about the Walthamstow protesters, you know, the lovely rainbow, nice, positive, we're so kind and progressive, standing outside of Wetherspoons and shouting at people. Yeah. Because, you know, those people do the jobs that these people don't want to do. They're the cleaners of their houses. They're the drivers of the vehicles that get, you know, when they want their Amazon packages delivered, that's who it is. Yes. When they want food on their supermarket shelves, that's who's done it. Yeah. When they want their relatives bathed, when they want people pushed around in wheelchairs, when they want carers and cleaners. And I hate... I can't tell you how much I viscerally hate classism more than anything.
Oh, no, and society would collapse if we didn't have people like Libby helping sort of oil the wheels, if you like, of society. We need everybody, and we need respect. We need respect about all sorts of things. Get rid of the labels, respect people, get great role models. When it comes
to class, I've never seen anyone classier than Libby. That woman is a queen, can I just say. She is an absolute queen.
The queen of clean.
We love her.
There you go.
Right, now, going to take a short break now, but guess what? When we come back, it's a full half hour of you time.
Oh, well, they're coming on. The callers?
Yeah.
Bring it on. We love the audience.
Why don't you treat yourself, open that bottle of wine, settle on down, pick up the phone, dial 0344 499 1,000.
Very good. It's one of those sort of phone lines,
Well,
is
it's
it?
definitely not. But anyway, we can't wait to speak to you just after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. And are you sitting comfortably? Did you get that glass of wine or gin or real ale or cider, if you're like me? And if so, let us begin. And we're going to start with Daniel, who is in Canning Town in East London. Hi,
Hello,
Daniel.
Daniel.
Hi, how you doing? You all right?
Yeah, good. How you doing, my love?
Do you know what? I've got a little bit of gin and I've got my cup of tea.
Oh, amazing.
I got a lot of gin. It's very helpful. It's got to be good.
That's my kind of guy. Well played.
It's about that time. But
It
yeah, sorry, what was the topic?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, my goodness. I was lovely to hear you, Daniel.
Daniel, the topic could be what you're going to drink tonight.
Yes.
But yeah, we can, whatever topic you want to talk about, my dear.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've got a question to ask you, Dan. Can I ask you?
Well, first of all,
go on.
If I can, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Is this Ash on as well?
No,
oh, no, yes, I'm Ash. I've had a bit of a makeover.
No, this is Andrew. I've kidnapped Andrew Eborn, who's normally a respectable barrister, but he's footloose and fancy-free tonight. Yes, darling.
I'd like to say, Alex, listen.
Yeah.
Tell whoever's talking in the background, to be quiet and learn from you. You're my best presenter, and you've been smashing it. I guess if I had anything to talk about, where do we start? Give me a topic.
Do you know, Daniel, I don't know where we start, but unfortunately we needed to start somewhere and we didn't really get it off the ground, did we? But I'm glad that Daniel thinks I'm his best presenter.
He's very good, but he thought I was Ash, so I thought that was very good. We like being Ash. He's a very talented broadcaster.
I love Ash. Ash is great.
He is good.
Let's speak to Jackie in London. And
Hello,
Jackie, the topic is up to you. What do you want to talk about?
Well, first of all, love, I'd like to say I'm so glad you're feeling better. I was quite worried about you last night, so don't drink that coffee out of that machine no more, please.
I'm not doing it. Look at this. I've got my orange squash. I'm sticking with that, and I'm using my laboratory rat over here.
I am the laboratory rat. It's got to be good.
Please bring your flask in from home. Don't touch it. Anyway, I want to talk about the immigration, and I've been really thinking about this because, well, maybe it's not these illegal immigrants' fault that they're coming here, because we're like Neverland to them. It's the government's fault.
Yeah, do you know what?
Come here.
I think you're absolutely right. If I was living in a country where my hourly wage was like 50 pence, where my prospects in life were going to be stuck in agrarian toil, where I had a government that nicked all my money and police that bribed me, and I, was contacted by some sort of suave and slick-sounding human trafficker who said, hey, if you pay this money, we're going to set you up in London, you're going to have this job, you can get all these perks and benefits, and hey, check out the women as well, then it's human nature to say, do you know what, I'm going to go for this, I want to change my life. And you can't blame the people themselves. And also, frankly, do you know, I've said before, when you've got men coming from vastly different cultures here as well, can you blame them when they turn up on our soil and don't actually automatically just adopt all of our cultures? I don't go to, when I go to Morocco quite a lot, one of my favourite countries.
Yes, beautiful country.
I don't suddenly go to Morocco and think, oh, that's it, I'm going to wear, I forget what that funny little hooded thing is they have in Marrakesh, the jalaba, that's what it's called. I don't just suddenly go, right, that's it, I'm going to walk around in a jalaba, I'm going to, I do sort of adopt and adapt in terms of covering myself up and so on and so forth, but I don't suddenly convert to Islam, for instance, and sort of, get up and pray at 5 in the morning. And And this is the thing, you can't blame people for being people.
No.
At the end of the day, the buck stops with governments.
Yeah. And it's a brilliant point, isn't it? It's all about respect. You respect the place that you go. When the people normally say, when in Rome, that's what the Roman does, but we're so sort of cosmopolitan. But you do make a brilliant point, and I think we do live in the best country in the world, and people want to come here, but what we have to make clear to people and to communicate is that you have to come here legally. If you come here illegally, it's not going to work. You're going to get sent back or whatever it's going to be on that sort of basis, and make that efficient. So it's passing on. It's got to be right, doesn't it, that communication message. But can I ask you something? We were talking about this sort of thing about whether it's shame or compassion that would persuade people. What do you think?
Shame and compassion on
Shame
what?
or compassion. So we're talking earlier about sort of drugs and changing societal behaviour.
Just sort of put your arm around someone and go, you know, I'm really sorry, but, you know, this is why you've done this. I must look after you and this is how I'm going to change your mind. Or should you know, does finger wagging work a bit better?
I think the finger wagging is coming to the British public, not immigrants coming over.
Yeah.
If they want to come over, they got to conform to our way of living, but they're not.
Well,
I don't feel safe. I'm 62.
Yeah.
I go to work on a bus every night. I'm watching everyone around me. 5, 6, 7 years ago, I never felt like that, but I do now.
What bit of London are you in, Jackie?
I live in Harrow.
Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, look, I agree with you totally. I've been living in London for over a decade, and something's changed quite radically in the past few years alone. And it's something that women feel viscerally and palpably. Women know. Not all men seem to know, but every time I speak to a woman in London, unless they deliberately don't want to...
It's not women of your age, Alex. It's women of my age, because we're the ones... It seems... This might seem really silly to you, but I feel like they're going to really get to white men through killing my age group.
Right.
Because we're the mothers of this country.
Yeah. Yeah, do you know, no one should feel unsafe when they live, especially not getting on public transport and going to work. And I think that it's about time our Mayor of London pulled his finger out, because having posters that just say mate and don't leer is not enough. Jackie, my darling, thank you ever so much for your call. Do stay safe. Mark is in Lincolnshire.
Hi, Mark.
Hi there, guys. You all right?
Yeah, great.
Good. He's still alive.
I'm still alive, still going, Mark. How are you?
Yeah, not so bad. It's my birthday today.
Oh, happy birthday! Celebrate. How many candles on the cake?
50.
Oh, the big one. Hawaii 5-0. We love it. It's got to be good. What would you like to talk about?
Well, I was going to talk about immigration, but you guys were talking about something a bit earlier that really intrigues me and really interests me. So I wanted to mention about that. That was, you mentioned about Nazism, far right, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the far left, how that all plays into it. And it's quite an interesting subject, that, because I've long held, not a belief, but I've long held, you know, questions regarding, is it more far left or is it more far right? Now, when you actually look at it, you were right in what you guys were saying. Nazism is National Socialism. So that kind of directs you towards the left. However, when you look at the 30s, you know, the time of real Nazism, the rise of Hitler and everything, the left were very much about dividing people through class, and it certainly wasn't about race. However, on the right of politics, they've never really divided people over race, because, you know, the evidence of that is they were always quite happy to wine and dine with, you know, sheikhs and basically anybody with money. It was more about, you know, money and capitalism, what your financial power was on the right of politics. And I find, like I say, I find that quite interesting. Whereas what you see now, if you fast forward to the modern day, it becomes really interesting, because now the left are separating people with race. So if you see where I'm going with that.
No, so in terms of, like, you know, I think what you mean essentially is that people on the left are very keen on talking about one's lived experience depending on their skin colour, DEI, wanting to almost sort of, what I always say is this, in this country, we don't talk about race when perhaps we need to. We're too squeamish to talk about certain things, and we push things under the carpet that need to be addressed. But then when it comes to areas that really, frankly, people just get on and you know, be colourblind, we obsess over race and we force race into those situations all the time. So, for instance, there are certain sort of studies and conversations that are not happening and need to happen, but they're not being addressed because of a sense of taboo and political correctness. And then when it comes to how many, you know, who do you want to fly this aeroplane during the war? Oh, well, it's got to be, a black lesbian woman who's from the north of England. It's madness, you know, it's absolute madness. Yeah. And it is funny that actually the left used to obsess a lot over defending the workers. I mean, this is the other weird tilt that's happened. The left and the right have gone like this, haven't they? Where back in the day, the Labour Party were Labour for the labouring classes. Yeah. Whereas now they seem to have turned their backs very much on those people and assumed the position of what I'd call elite luxury ideologies and sort of very middle-class attitudes. And it's more the right wing of politics now that's down here that used to be the sort of landowners and, you know, there's been this strange reversal of the poles.
It is interesting. As you know, I hate labels, but I mean, it's George Galloway who always used to say it's basically two cheeks of the same backside. Yeah. And what's happening, and I think going back, always good to quote George, it's going back to what we say about principles and values, that's got to be right. Because if you look at particular policies, that's got to be about the right thing to do. Look at policies and people rather than left or right.
I'm so done with the concept of left wing and right wing. I mean, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter. Let's just have good stuff, because this is the other thing that's happened as a result of this weird categorisation is, you know, I was in the Brexit party, so people are, oh, well, you voted Brexit. Yes. So therefore, you probably think all of these things, and I get a whole checkbox underneath.
That's the problem, isn't it?
And I'm like, you'd be surprised, because I'm quite socially conservative. I'd call it just old school values. I wouldn't say I'm a sort of, you know, Mary Whitehouse reborn, but I do sort of, you know, set a lot of store by the sort of morals that my grandmother taught me. But when it comes to economics, I sort of think in a global era you need to be a bit protectionist, that you need to actually protect your workers, that you can't just go, oh, it's free markets, when you can be undercut and competed against by all corners of the globe.
I think so I take respect a far for everybody. You're right.
Centre-left approach to
and I think rather than label, it's turning around and saying, let's respect everybody in the conversation. Let's make sure that there's access to health, access to proper education.
Lazy siloing
all that sort of stuff.
It's just
I'm just saying, all of that's right and all that's left, I think, is wrong.
Ridiculous.
Let's look at policies and people.
Exactly. Thank you, Mark.
Great call. Happy birthday. Save us a bit of birthday cake.
Happy birthday, young man. Have a drink on us. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, don't you worry, because more of your calls before I hand over to the wonderful Petri Hoskin. We're back after this. Hello, welcome back. Turns out some of you out there are big fans of Morocco as well. This is a great message. Stuart Brown says, Alex, I'm in Morocco right now and suffering from a mosquito bite to my left eye.
To your left eye?
Yeah,
good heavens.
A mosquito bite to the eye. I'm sorry, Stuart. That doesn't sound good.
Doesn't sound good at all.
Take some mint out of the mint tea and I don't know.
Is that what you do?
I don't know. It might work. It might work.
Dr. Alex Phillips.
And he says in Morocco, you aren't allowed to go on about other religions, and why would you? I mean, this is about sort of, assimilation and respect, although I've never found Morocco to be particularly authoritarian. Where are you in Morocco, Stuart?
Somewhere with a lot of mosquitoes, by the sound of it.
Yeah, you are sort of outside of Marrakesh and up in the Atlas Mountains. Might probably be cool there for mosquitoes, maybe up near the north coast. Let me know. And David says, Alex, a Berber is very different from the Islam you see in the UK. I lived in Morocco and Andalusia for many years. True, I love the Berbers. Great people. And it's a very sort of, because Morocco obviously is divided into, largely, you've got Arabs and you've got the Berbers. Yes. And very sort of different approaches to life. And the Berbers up in the mountains are, I just love them.
Oh, glory. And apparently it's really hot in Morocco at the moment.
Well, at the moment
it's really hot.
At the moment it is. But, you know, the amazing thing is, if you go over the Atlas Mountains to go down to the Sahara Desert, you leave Marrakesh at about, sort of, say, 35 degrees. Okay. When you get up to the top of the Atlas Mountains, they're covered in snow. And then you go back down the other side to the Sahara Desert.
Oh,
yeah,
glorious.
It really is.
I love it.
The road over that route is not one for the faint-hearted.
Right. All the mosquitoes. They don't like the snow, do they?
I've never had mosquito. I mean, having lived in those different tropical countries, I've not had mosquito problems in Morocco before. So I mean, that's why I'm interested to know where. Right, let's speak to Cindy, who is in Michigan. Hi, Cindy.
Hi there. I wanted to ask you to put on your tinfoil hat, Alex, only if it applies, okay? Well, do you find a kind of do you find it strange that here in the U.S. we're having huge problems with illegal immigration, and also the U.K. is? We've let in millions.
I can answer this question for you, and actually, tinfoil hat not needed. Because actually there are plenty of hostile states to the Western countries who, we often call them the anti-Western axis, who are using illegal immigration as an act of grey zone warfare. They're deliberately trying to disrupt our societies and divide us. There's planes that take off every day from Turkey that go to Central America, completely fully booked. You can't get a seat on them, fully booked. My great friend James, who's an investigative reporter, covered this. And they land in Central America, and those people are then pushed up to storm the border into America. Same thing is happening from China. So I think you just have to put two and two together. Now, there'll be other people who are exploiting those routes, drugs cartels and, people traffickers who are just in it for illegal reasons because they make a heck of a lot of money. Now, what I don't understand, and this is where I might sort of get my... Hold on, where's my tinfoil hat? There it is. Let's put it back on. What I don't understand is why the West seem to be so complicit in not tackling it and not doing anything, in not actually putting in place tough policies to counteract this. Because if, like I said, if one or two countries turned around, when Giorgia Meloni said, I'm going to send the Italian Navy into the Mediterranean to send boats back to Tunisia, and she stood there in Lampedusa after there'd been a great number of boats coming across, more than the entire population of the island in one day. Ursula von der Leyen, one of my favourite people, Miss President of the EU, she came down and stood next to Meloni the next day, and they had a joint press conference saying the EU and Italy are going to work together on this, and guess what? No more Navy. And I'm pretty sure that Ursula would have said to Georgia, mate, you owe the ECB a lot of money after the Eurozone crisis. You want to pull that trick, sunshine, and we're going to make a lot of problems for you, because this is how the EU bullied Greece after the Eurozone crisis. That's all documented in Varoufakis's memoirs. But what I want to know is why? Why are they so afraid to properly tackle this issue? I don't get it. What?
Because they want this disruption, like you're saying. That's what I feel.
Well, this is it. The enemies of our country want that destruction, but I don't understand why our countries themselves... I mean, I get that there's all sorts of tracts of international law and tort and, all this sort of a Gordian knot, if you will, of supranational organisations and treaties that have been signed that might make it difficult to deal with. But it seems to me that all of the organisations, from the EU to the UN, just kind of go like, well, you've got to let people in. And I don't get that approach.
Neither do I.
Well, there you go, Cindy. I was able to answer one bit. The rest of it, well, like I said, I didn't really put my tinfoil hat back on for that, because I actually don't really have a theory for it, because if I tried to theorise it, it'd probably scare me half to death. Let's quickly catch up with Mark, who's in Carlisle. If you were in this room right now, I tell you what, I have got producers scurrying along the floor like rugrats, so they're not walking in front of the camera. Poor Abby, what are you doing down there, love?
Yes, what?
I tell you, where I'm sitting, you've got Abby scurrying across the floor, kneeling next to Andrew underneath a desk, and I'm like, this is like Bill Clinton's office in 1995. Shocking. Mark, in Carlisle, how are you doing?
Hi, I'd like to warn Yvette Cooper and the Home Office. Don't do what you did when you went in power and use two-tier deportations like you did with my wife. My wife was deported. Your producers have got copies of the stories, still on the BBC website. They picked on easy targets just to get the numbers up, and I hope they're not going to do that with the 14,000.
Roll this back. Where is your wife from?
Mexico.
And how long has she been living in the United Kingdom?
5 years marriage.
5 years of marriage, and then they deported her to Mexico.
They bundled her into a van and never seen her again.
Oh, my...
It's on the BBC website. Your producers will show you. It got massive publicity. Charles Clarke lost his job over it. Remember when he released 1,000 prisoners by mistake and he had to resign? I was the straw that broke the camel's back, because I went outside the Home Office with a picture of my wife in my undies to get publicity, and he lost his job the next day.
Blimey.
This isn't real.
How's your wife doing? Have you spoken to her?
I don't think she's coming back now, Alex, because she's now a lesbian.
Well, I'm sorry to have learnt that, Mark. I can't believe that. I mean, it's just an awful, traumatic time that you've gone through.
The producers will show you the publicity that it got at the time.
Well, I will ask them, most certainly. Mark, yeah, I mean, this is it. It does seem to me, look, I've got a Turkish next-door neighbour. Thank you, Mark, by the way. I've got Turkish next-door neighbours who are a top cancer specialist and a biochemist, and they have to have a fight every 5 seconds to make sure they're not chucked out of the country. And we need these people in the country. And sometimes I just don't get it. Or someone who managed to elegantly sashay in front of the camera rather than crawl on hands and knees underneath it is my saviour, the saviour of my life and my dignity, Miss Hoskin.
Yes, are you feeling better now?
A lot better. And he's been drinking.
I drank the same stuff and I've survived the whole show.
Fine as well.
Good.
Oh,
I was
fine.
very poorly. Yeah. I like the fact that first of all, and you saw me and you're like, from broadcaster to broadcaster, you're like, she's gone vacant behind the eyes.
You were vacant. Yeah, I could see that you were. I mean,
she's gone.
But I have to say, you're gonna have to grow a pair, because there's been a time I was doing a breakfast show somewhere and I was so ill and I had a bucket by my feet, and during the breaks I would throw up in the bucket and then carry on broadcasting.
And look at
you've got to
Petri,
keep
all
going,
I can say is you had to sit on this seat after me, so just count yourself lucky that I vacated the studio. I mean, but this kind of sums up. This is the mood music of the latter half of this programme
we've
tonight.
an extraordinary programme, haven't we?
We start off being very serious and very sensible.
Yes.
We've covered all sorts of really mad topics tonight.
My
so I've got them riled up.
My highlight has been the anagram of Kamala Harris, which is with malaria shark. Can you believe that?
It's wonderful.
Isn't that glorious? We did Joe Biden, because I knew Joe Biden was bejoined, and malaria shark.
Somebody once told me, and I've never checked it, that the anagram of my name is Pert Hooks.
I think Pert Hooks are good.
I think you're changing my name to that.
Pert Hooks is lovely.
Yeah.
Coming up after 10 o'clock.
Pert Hooks.
I like that.
I like it.
Mine doesn't really come as anything good. I couldn't really get anything sort of tasty out of it. So there you go. I'm back on tomorrow night. If you want to sort of go and figure out an anagram of Alex Phillips, you can call me Alexandra if that helps. Throw some extra letters at the situation, then do let me know. Not now, though, because I'm about to go home. Petri, tell us what you're talking about.
What I'm going to be talking about, first of all, this is a fascinating case, actually, about the primary school teacher who's been banned from teaching after sharing sexist and homophobic messages about female staff with other male colleagues. Now, what's interesting about this is this was on WhatsApp and it was a private conversation, but somebody's dobbed them in. And I was sitting there thinking about some of the... Nothing's private anymore. We can't ever take it for granted now that if you're friends with somebody and you're sending saucy stuff or silly stuff, that will remain private. Well, this is extraordinary. What they were saying in this group of men was horrendous, awful, disgusting. But it was a private conversation.
Right.
I don't really have a problem with that. But the police got a hold of it. And then I've got the testimony here, actually. I've been reading this.
So
the Teaching Regulation Agency.
But the knock-on effect, it happened also in Wayne Couzens' case.
Extraordinary.
And they were looking at WhatsApp messages, and you're right, and they're prosecuting as a result of private
messages.
Do you know what I'm going to say? And I might be hanged, drawn and quartered for saying this. Hanged, you see, I got it right.
Look at you.
But, you know, when it comes to humour, look, if you're saying things publicly in